Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock. If you could please take your seats. Welcome to Michigan CPAC 2018. My name is Jay Taylor, and I'll be your host for today. I'm a director with the Michigan Conservative Union, and we've got an action-packed lineup for you today. I'll briefly cover this. It's going to be a very, very fast-paced day, so I hope you can kind of keep up with us. We've got over 30 speakers addressing various topics, including the courts, fiscal policy, education, youth, and many other topics. I'll go over the agenda in just a moment. But what we'd like to do is start out with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll move into some music provided by Lemon James before we get into our program. So let me briefly cover the program. It's on the back part of your program today, the booklet. After the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll talk about the state of the conservative movement in Michigan. We'll then move into national conservatism and what that means and where that's headed. We'll then talk about cutting taxes and regulations in Michigan. We have some awards to give out this morning, what we call the Liberty Awards. We'll move in then to defending the Constitution, a really important topic. And then economics in the Trump era. A lot of changes going on, as you know. And then things that we need to know about the U.S. Supreme Court. There have been some decisions recently and some other things that are in process right now that are very important to the conservative movement. We'll then have Judge Michael Warren talk about patriotism. We've got some coverage of the Tea Party movement today, where that stands. We have a keynote luncheon. Chef Ruth is providing her famous Italian pasta. It's going to be a great luncheon. We've got Dr. Robert Steele, the Republican National Convention Committee, it's going to be talking, and a prayer from our local chaplain, Daryl Franzel, who's Capital City Baptist Church pastor. We've got some videos lined up talking about freedom. We've got a ceremony here to pin new members for Michigan Conservative Union. We've got some videos on guns. Dr. Robert Steele will be speaking. We've got Larry Pratt from the Director of Gun Owners of America going to talk about freedom. Some sessions on energy, competition and policy. Full of Wind, which is about wind energy. Some really important topics around education. It's very key. Eliminating the U.S. Department of Education. We've got some sessions on talk radio, which I think you'll find informative and interesting. And then we've got some focus on the conservative youth movement. And we've got some folks from Michigan State University, and we'll be giving you an overview of what's going on in that regard. We've got Grant Stovall talking about the It's All About Us, the Young Americans for Freedom. We've got Mary Sears talking about life. Conservative successes, we'll be talking about rolling back regulations, women in conservative politics, ballot initiatives, and cutting federal spending. One of the important things I want to mention is for the speakers, we're going to be lining them up in a green room. Some of them are very quick, 3-minute presentations, sometimes 10 minutes, etc. So we're going to ask the speakers to, 10 minutes before your appointed time on the schedule, please go to the green room, which is on the other side of this room here. And Janice Daniels will get you staged up here on time. 2 minutes before the speaker is done, we've got Dawn who's going to put a laser light on them so they'll kind of know that they've got 2 minutes. And I'll give them a 1-minute warning. Okay, with that, let's get started. I'd like to introduce Bishop Dr. Ira Combs Jr., who is going to make some remarks. He's from the Greater Bible Temple in Jackson, Michigan, and he's also a member of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. Dr. Bishop.
Thank you. Let us all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, including the unborn. God love you. Right, go. At this time, I want to first of all give honor to Pat Kolbach and to this extraordinary staff of willing workers and activists that have come together and made right to work a reality for this state and for many other states across the country. Let's put your hands together for them, everyone, and applaud them. If I may. I'd like to inconvenience you at this time for a moment of prayer. I've been asked to do the opening prayer, so if we can all stand for the opening prayer again and repeat after me before we begin the prayer. Repeat this saying. It's a new beatitude. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Blessed are the brief,
Blessed are the brief,
for they shall be heard again."
they shall be heard again.
That means I'm going to be very brief. We'll bow heads at this time for the country and for the Michigan CPAC and for all of these extraordinary workers. Let us bow our heads in honor of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Almighty and eternal God, Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord Jesus Christ, supplying the needs of your people by the way of Calvary's cross. On this historic and momentous occasion, with this collegiate family of intellectuals, social, religious, conservatives, and transformational leaders have gathered to spread the influence of good in our communities. We pray that you would grant each of us the courage and personal constitution to change the things we are able to change, to accept the things we are unable to change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Help us to be unwavering in our convictions, unfaltering in our faith, and unrelenting in our pursuit of that which is good, decent, and acceptable in thy sight, till justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. We pray these blessings upon this country, this Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Declaration of Independence, and all of its people, world without end, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord Jesus Christ. Blessings we humbly request of thee. And everyone said amen.
Amen.
Let us say amen again.
Amen.
You may take your seats. I really don't have many remarks. I think that the work that has been done by Pat Kobach, who I'm sure with Norm Hughes and others have been involved with you, who are the brains behind Right to Work, have been instrumental in bringing the, quite frankly, redemptive qualities to the workforce and to opportunity and the economics and financials of this state and across the country, in removing the scourge of many of the corrupt unions, and I certainly put myself on the line for saying this, that have been influencing the workforce for a multiplicity of decades. The work that you do is, quite frankly, unparalleled. And it's significant and important that all of us continue to be inspired by the Spirit of God and by the Spirit of good to lend our gifts, our skill sets, our talents, our energies to the vision and to the foresight of those who have been participating in these initiatives down through the years. Donald Trump has been an extraordinary disruptor. He's gone to Washington, D.C. to, in fact, drain the swamp, so to speak. He has been a very interesting character. Mike Pence has, quite frankly, been a great support to him. I think as far as religious leadership is concerned, Mike Pence and the work that he's done in partnering with our current president will go down in history as some of the most influential religious work that has brought about the return of Christian redemption in our communities and the rights of Christians and religious personalities in this country to speak freely and to act freely, to spread their influence for the good of all of us. And so I would only urge you not to be discouraged by the liberals. I would also speak to the issue of the liberals who attacked me when I was, shall I say, appointed by the governor to the Civil Rights Commission, even though I have very conservative civil rights values and believe that civil rights, when issues arise, needs to be pursued from a solution-oriented disposition and perspective. And I believe that we should not demonize people. I think that we should be working together for the good of the whole, bringing people together to bring about solutions and find common ground where all can work together for the good of the whole and for the good of the community. that we are all a part of. And so I, quite frankly, took it as a badge of honor when I was criticized. I found it very fascinating. I was enamored and uplifted to know that the liberals were angry, upset, and in arms. I was going to go on a parade of interviews so that I could express myself and defend myself, but the governor very wisely encouraged me to stand down on any further interviews so that I would be able to reverse this situation of being a lightning rod of criticism because of my conservative views on family values, that is traditional marriage, and on the rights of the unborn. And so in my closing remarks, I would simply again salute Pat Colback. Him and I have been working together on these kinds of things for many years. He has been a leader in reaching out to all communities of all colors and ethnicities. He has been the common sense voice for these very prominent principles for which we stand and believe. And he has been the, shall we say, vessel that God has used to influence all of us in this state in particular and across the country, I'm sure, to carry us to this threshold that we all arrive at on this day in history. Again, I encourage you as I close for a second time, as preachers always do. They usually take 3 times to close. But I encourage you to continue to fight on, never be discouraged, or never allow yourself to think that we are losing. There are more with us than there are with those who are for evil. In the end, the words of the Apostle Peter will prevail. Who can harm you if you be followers of that which is good? God bless you. God love you. Heaven smile upon you. And thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity just to say a prayer and a few words. Bless you now.
Thank you so much. You have to sit here.
Thank you so much. It was very inspirational. Speaking of inspirational, we have music guests with us this morning. Lemon James going to play the Star Spangled Banner. So, Lemon?
We just wanted to give a little explanation here. Lemon James is a singer-songwriter here in Michigan, and she is going to share with us Jimi Hendrix, who was a part of the 101st Airborne, his patriotic, respectful version of our national anthem.
true Jimi Hendrix spirit. Thank you so much, Lemon James. As a former guitarist and band member, I can appreciate that so much. I'd like to now introduce the Dean of the Michigan Conservative Union, Dean of the Michigan Conservative Movement, but also Chairman of the Michigan Conservative Union itself, Mr. Norm Hughes. Norm's going to address us this morning. We're so pleased to have him on the agenda.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I'm going to be very brief because you got a big agenda today, but I want to stress to you a couple things about what is happening in the conservative movement. It is fragmented somewhat. We're sorry to hear that. But today, for example, there's a group of evangelicals meeting on the west side of the state that are normally with us. There's other groups that are having Trump rallies around the state and so on, and that's all fine. But some organization has to be true to what we believe in. Something has to be the heart and soul that is the continuation from Jefferson and Lincoln and Hayek and Milton Friedman and so on. And this is the organization. It was interesting that we had in town the day he got the Nobel Prize, Milton Friedman. And we had authored the Tax Limitation Amendment, which took us 3 times, but we put it in the Michigan Constitution. The government growth cannot exceed the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is less. It was huge because in the previous decade, it had gone up 10% a year, while personal income has gone up 3% over a 10-year period, a 51% growth of government with respect to the people. We have saved your family thousands of dollars since 1978, and I hope you'll respect the fact that that's been a hard work that's been very important. In 2011, we had our first CPAC. We had 95 registered the night before and 375 showed up. We had to cram in and get additional tables and so on right in this very same room. And we decided at that point in time we had several breakouts, and we typically have, as an outcome of these CPAC conferences, task forces, citizen task forces, because we can't trust the government to do it for us. And we know the results of every government study is we need more government. We need more money. We need more taxes. So our task forces on education pushed through several key pieces of legislation. It's a way of kind of puppy training the legislature and getting the governor used to signing our bills. Teacher tenure reform, stopping school districts from collecting union dues and PAC money. And we ran through right to work. This group put together a coalition of 218 other groups. And with that 218 groups, over 70,000 members, 20,000 businesses, we would not say no. The governor came to us and said, will you wait till the last year of my term? No. We got a narrow window of opportunity. 2010, we had lost 83,000 union members, union jobs in Michigan, and a total of over 500,000 jobs in Michigan. Mayflower was busy taking people out of Michigan. We lost, I don't have a child or a grandchild living in Michigan anymore. You know? There's a real problem with Michigan's government growth and growth and growth. I call it the socialist state of Michigan. It's under this, even under the Republican administration, the budget has increased so much. And they, we have in the Constitution, they have to balance the budget. But debt and debt and debt. Bills in the legislature right now allowing cities and townships and villages to acquire more debt. Well, you can't acquire debt when you're balancing the budget, can you? So there's a lot of work to be done yet. I'd like to direct yourself to page 7 in the program book. Part of our strategy, and we have a very comprehensive strategy, we operate by management by objectives that we use in the Reagan administration. I was blessed to work in 3 senior policy positions for him. There are things that we are doing to be able to bring about change. Now, you'll hear today from Publius Hulda and others about an attempt to have a new constitutional convention. You open that up, you got a can of worms. You just can't put the lid on it once it opens up. We are the stop on that. We now have 56 votes of the 110 in the House with us. That's a margin of 1. So you need to be in touch with your legislators. No on Article 5, no on Convention of States. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about Convention of States. It's a non-starter. It's just a way of opening it up, and then there are substitute constitutions waiting, and we'll forever lose our freedoms. Part of our nucleus is what we call Project Kirk. Russell Kirk was a personal friend of mine. His wife Annette is keeping the Kirk Foundation going, and they're an inspiration for us. Kirk wrote the book, The Conservative Mind, which was the blueprint for the modern conservative movement. The book that Ronald Reagan and Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley Jr. and so on was inspired by. We are keeping that legend going, and Project Kirk is a series of lessons we have in our newsletter. And if you're not on our newsletter, Conservative Choices newsletter, you need to give us your email address before you leave so we can put you on it. It's about 26,000 people around the state that get our news periodically with statements of positions, with an update of current things that are happening and our responses to them, drawing your attention to key happenings that are going on, and of course, a good helping of Kirk and other great people. Operation Watchdog is our program to keep the legislature in line. We'll do a legislative rating periodically, and we'll put out alerts asking you to contact your legislators to stop certain things or to praise them when they do something well. And Project Friedman is, Abe Lincoln said, you change public policy by changing public opinions. So Project Friedman, we're asking you periodically to take something out of our newsletter or some kind of a prompt we give you and write op-eds, call into talk shows, do whatever you can to put into the talk to your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, your church members, your family. We got liberals in all of our families, right? Got to convince them we need less government. We don't need more government. The more government grows, the less our freedom. We keep losing more and more freedom. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope to meet many of you. By the way, that Hendricks lady is an elected official in Genoa Township, one of our good people. We are electing people to local office, and it's not too late yet to file if you haven't, especially for a local school board. And so we had a great campaign school yesterday, and we'll try to give you what resources and help we can. But God bless America, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.
I'm so proud to introduce our next speaker from the Heritage Foundation. We've got Jordan Hess. We're going to be talking about the Trump administration, giving us a report on the conservatism nationally. So with that.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm still fairly new at the Heritage Foundation. I spent about 5 years working for U.S. Senator Mike Lee of Utah. I was his campaign manager in 2016 out in Utah for his re-election, and this group reminds me a lot of the campaign trail because this is where all of the work is really done, is with people and groups similar to yours across this country. You're the ones fighting on the front lines. You are the ones affecting real change in this country because Congress refuses to listen to you. I live in the swamp. And let me tell you, I'm grateful for my position at Heritage because it allows me to get out into real America. In the past 5 weeks, I've been to Arizona, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and Ohio. In the coming weeks, I'll be in Texas and Utah. Everywhere I go, the things I hear are similar. Washington is broken. Congress doesn't listen. For example, they recently passed that over $1 trillion omnibus bill. It was written in secret, over 2,200 pages long, and Congress was given less than 2 days to read it and understand it before they had to vote on it. It did things like fund Planned Parenthood, for example. We can't have this anymore. I'm sure the chiropractors in D.C. are happy, and they have a steady stream of business because a lot of congressmen have backbone problems. There is not much spine in Washington, D.C. The left has gone mad. The deep state, in conjunction with the mainstream media, are resisting this president and this administration at every turn. And these are common themes that I hear coming from folks like you around the country. To that end, let me share a little bit about the influence the Heritage Foundation is having and what we're trying to do to assist President Trump and his administration. There are 62 Heritage staff alumni who have joined the administration and 13 Heritage intern alumni that have joined the administration. Whenever there is a new Republican president, the Heritage Foundation creates what we call a mandate for leadership. We did this with President Ronald Reagan. The mandate for leadership is a document, a book, where we send the president hundreds of policy recommendations, things that the president can do to shrink the size of government, reform government, decrease spending, and give more freedom to Americans. At the end of the Reagan administration, after his first year in office, we did an analysis on how much of our policy proposals he either implemented or embraced. After Reagan's first year in office, he had implemented or embraced 49% of Heritage Foundation's recommendations. Pretty good. We all know that President Reagan was a great president. We delivered a similar mandate to President Trump when he was elected, outlining things that we thought he could do to, like I said, streamline government, reduce spending, reduce the size of government, and give more freedom to the American people. We did the same analysis at the end of Trump's first year to see how he compared to President Reagan. Does anyone want to guess? Did he do more or less than President Reagan? More. He embraced or implemented 64% of our recommendations. At Heritage, we will continue to put forward good conservative policy ideas that both Congress and this administration should adopt. Quickly, here is a small sampling of some of our current policy priorities. One priority, the Child Welfare Inclusion Act. This act, a policy coming out of Heritage, would protect faith-based welfare providers and agencies like faith-based adoption agencies. In Michigan alone, there are 13,000 children in foster care waiting to be adopted. However, you're probably aware that ACLU has filed a lawsuit against the state of Michigan trying to shut down these faith-based adoption agencies. So the Child Welfare Inclusion Act seeks to protect these faith-based welfare providers from government retaliation only because they are affiliated with religion. The second policy that is a priority is military education savings accounts. 70% of Americans aged 18 to 24 cannot qualify for military service due to a lack of physical or academic fitness. So in order to support a strong military, we need to make sure that we can recruit and retain good soldiers. There are about 35% of active military who say that dissatisfaction with their children's education is a significant factor in their decision whether to stay or leave the military service. So we have a policy proposal that would give military families choice in education through education savings accounts so that their children are not trapped in failing schools that happen to surround military bases. We think this policy will help strengthen our military and retain good members of the military. Third, we believe we still need to repeal and replace Obamacare. Congress has failed to do so. So the Heritage Foundation is currently leading a group of consensus builders in Washington, D.C., where we have a plan, and we just need Congress to take it up and pass it and implement it. Because from 2013 to 2017, there was a 105% increase in individual premiums as a result of Obamacare. If we do not repeal and replace Obamacare, we will spend $1.8 trillion over the next 10 years propping up this failing system. Our plan would empower patients with more choices, reduce costs by unwinding heavy federal mandates, repeal and replace American Affordable Care Act subsidies to insurance companies, and replace those with grants to the states, ensure all Americans can choose a private health plan and the doctor of their choice. We know that the plan of the left is to force all of us into one single-payer system. Our plan provides health security, it protects life, and puts federal spending on a real budget. We must repeal and replace Obamacare. And finally, another priority of ours. It was tragic to see the school shooting in Florida, and we're still dealing with that. However, the knee-jerk answer by many liberals is to ban guns. But the questions we face are much too complex to be resolved by those two little words, ban guns. So let me just state some facts, and you'll hear more about this at lunch. But we've started a school safety initiative at Heritage, and I've got a lot of product over at our table explaining this initiative. Violence rates in America are actually decreasing. Firearms are used in self-defense hundreds of thousands of times each year. Most gun-related crimes are carried out with illegally owned firearms, as much as 80% according to some estimates. Over 90% of public mass shootings take place in gun-free zones, where civilians are not permitted to carry firearms. An estimated 60% of mass public shooters were diagnosed with a mental disorder or had demonstrated signs of serious mental illness. And adolescents living in intact families are less likely to exhibit violent behaviors or engage in fighting and report lower levels of stress. So rather than ban guns, we need to look at mental health. We need to look at school safety. We need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. And we need to strengthen American families. There are too many children living in fatherless homes, families who are broken, and this needs to change in America. Once again, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be here, to be with all of you. Like I said, I have a lot of product over there. Feel free to pick it up. Sign up so that we can keep in contact with you. Thank you for all that you do here in Michigan at the local level. Keep putting pressure on Washington, D.C. Maybe one day we will grow a spine. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Patrick Kolbeck. He's going to be speaking about cutting Michigan spending and taxes. Senator Kolbeck.
Well, the good news, and Norm's already talked about cutting spending and taxes, which is really an important thing. And we're going to highlight kind of why I think we have some of those problems in the state level. But first and foremost, I want to thank Bishop Combs for all the shout-outs on Right to Work. But I also want to make sure, though, everybody understands the role that Norm Hughes and Randy Bishop and a lot of the folks that are in this room played in making that happen. I may have had this 300-task project plan to go off and get Right to Work passed, but had this little line item called, "And then a miracle happens." And that miracle was putting pressure on the unions to go off and make a bad move. And the grassroots provided that pressure to make that happen. That's when Bob King went out and pushed forward that Proposal 2, which turned into the impetus for Governor Snyder to finally put Right to Work on his agenda. So I want everybody to understand that it was the grassroots, and Norm Hughes was leading that effort that actually got them to feel the pressure to go off and put that nice little Proposal 2 on the ballot for everybody to reject at the hoop. So it was very nice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about state spending. And I think Norm framed it right. Here we are under a Republican administration for the last 7 years, and our budget's gone up by over $10 billion. Just to put that in context, here's our nice little chart of our Michigan budget history. All right, so we're sitting here, let me, if I got this, yeah, all right. So when the Republicans took over, we're sitting right, this is our first budget that we put in, and that was a little bit lower than what we had for the feds, or the year before, because they got a nice little boost from the stimulus bill. That's what ARRA is, ARRA. All right, so we came in and essentially righted the ship. There's about a $1.5 billion structural budget deficit when we started. But ever since then, it's been climbing and climbing and climbing. And it's over $10 billion that's actually been increased. And 42% of that is federal contributions, so I want to be fair on it. By the way, if they get to 51%, I think they have a controlling share. But we have an issue with always coming up with a solution to every single budget issue is a tax increase. So let's just kind of do a little bit of a deep dive on where are some of the big cost drivers in this. And surprise, surprise, thank you, Jordan. I think we were talking about Obamacare, right? Well, guess who expanded Medicaid here in the state of Michigan? Guess where all the big price increases are coming from? All right. And, at the time Medicaid expansion was being pushed, I said, guys, there's a couple different ways of going off and getting health care for those who need access to health care that haven't been able to get access to it. One is to take money from one group of people and give it to another people and lower their costs. I said, that's called socialism. And eventually, as Margaret Thatcher once said, eventually you're going to run out of other people's money. And by the way, that's where we're headed right now. And the other is to lower the cost of delivering health care for everybody. Well, I chose the latter, and they overrode me here. But that's what's going on right now, that Medicaid cost. Now, there's going to be some push to go off and do some Medicaid work requirements next week after we get back from budget, or after we get back from the spring break here. But that's kind of putting lipstick on a pig from my perspective. It's something that should be done, but it's something that's intended to go off and try to help the fact that healthy Michigan is not so healthy. It's set up for automatic repeal per provisions of the legislation due to a lot of the pressure that the people in this room placed during the discussion around Medicaid expansion. They actually put in provisions that had a poison pill in there, that if they did not reap the savings that they said that they were going to get, it was going to be automatically repealed. Well, those conditions are going to, according to Senate Fiscal Agency, is going to occur in 2020. That's why you're seeing some scrambling to go off and try to put some duct tape and putty into healthy Michigan right now. And the other area is on transportation, which is kind of surprising, right? Because how many of you guys dodged potholes on the way here? So they raised the transportation budget, but you know, the function on transportation, frankly, the big problem is it's not the funding for the transportation, it's building higher quality roads. And we're going to get into that a little bit here. All right, so Michigan has a balanced budget. That's a good thing, right? So we don't spend any more than we take in, theoretically. So we get revenue in the form of fees and taxes, and on the other side, we have expenses. And then when a budget process is about mapping both of those things together. So whenever we run into budget issues, why is it that we only talk about the revenue side of the equation? Right? So when we talked about our structural deficit back in fiscal year 11, all they talked about was this senior pension tax, and they talked about a 6% corporate income tax. You know, I submitted a list of $770 million worth of cost reductions as an alternative to the senior pension tax that weren't even considered. They weren't even looking at it, and this is a Republican-controlled legislature. How about on Medicaid? You know, we had a little problem a few years back where the federal government under the previous administration was saying that, oh, you know, you can't use a broad-based or you can't use a targeted tax incentive around HMOs. We were actually taxing HMOs to pay for Medicaid, which is kind of appropriate because it's all the HMOs that are providing the Medicaid, so it's the health plans, but apparently they had a nice little lobbying effort, and they wanted to extend the tax so that it applied to all claims, whether or not they were coming from an HMO or not. And so what they were using, because they were worried that the federal government would disallow any contributions from taxes due to these HMO-based taxes, they said you have to adopt something else that's more broad-based. And so rather than looking at ways to decrease the cost of delivering Medicaid, they decided to put in this 1% HICA tax. And by the way, do you guys remember what the United States income tax started out at? What rate it started out at? I seem to remember it was 1%. So the camel's nose is under the tent on an area that I don't think we need to worry about. I don't think we need to find ways to increase the cost of health care nowadays. And then let's talk road funding. What was the only solution that they wanted to talk about when it came to road funding? It was how to increase taxes, right? So they did a $2 billion proposal known as Proposal 15-1. And by the way, just so you guys know what kind of pressure you get, I was told that if I voted for this, I would get a lot of friends in the legislature and I get a lot of support for my re-election campaign. I didn't vote for it. The next one is, so I fought that tooth and nail, and the voters rejected it by 81% margin. So what did they do right after that? Yeah, they passed another gas tax, this time without a vote of the people. And you know what else? To really, you know, put a burr in my saddle on this one. Right after they passed that $600 million tax increase, they put forward a supplemental that took $400 million from transportation and put it toward backfilling potholes and other priorities like Medicaid expansion. That was a bait and switch. So this is what happens when you just focus on the revenue side of the equation. You get bad legislation. Under Republicans, you'd think we'd be able to look at it this way. Let's go off and look at other ways of solving those problems. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because this is the challenge for us in the grassroots, is that whenever they face some of these budget issues and they only come up with the idea of increasing taxes, We need to be able to go up with some alternatives and actually say, I've been very consistent saying, guys, I'm opposing this legislation, but here's another way of achieving the same objective that satisfies conservative principles. So on the structural deficit, well, instead of going off and taxing seniors, how about if we just find a way to cut spending? That wasn't even on the table back then. That's what should be on the table. Medicaid accounting procedures. So if we're worried about that HICA tax, how about if we just find ways of delivering Medicaid more effectively and more efficiently? I'm happy to say in the last budget we actually did get a pilot implemented that would decrease the cost of delivering Medicaid on the order of 20%. But the administration's been dragging their feet on the implementation of it, and it has not launched yet despite being in our budget right now. But it has the opportunity, it helps when the person leading Medicaid was one of the architects of Obamacare in the state. So he wasn't too thrilled about implementing my idea. So he's gone now. He quit not a couple months ago. But we still have to deliver that approach. But that's an opportunity to go off and lower the cost of delivering Medicaid. And then on road funding, if we focused actually on building higher quality roads, you can actually spend less on the overall maintenance costs on an annual basis for the roads by lowering the total life cycle costs. If you have to rebuild the roads 4 times less often than you do today, not only do you see less of these stupid orange barrels, but the roads, but you actually spend a lot more on the maintenance of those roads. These are things that we have to start changing the Overton window, because right now the Overton window is only focused on the revenue side of the equation. Nobody wants to look at the expense side. Now it gets a little frustrating, a little daunting right now, because part of the reason why they only look at the revenue side is because there's far fewer taxes than to deal with than there are expense line items. There's something like a dozen or so different tax mechanisms that we have in the state. So everybody just goes to that nice little easy to reach shelf and just starts tweaking numbers and puts them up and say, oh, well, we'll just find the appropriate tax to go off and apply to this budget issue. It's much more difficult to attack the expense side because there are thousands of line items in the budget to go off and address. But the good news is, with the help of my good friend Tanya Shoemaker over here, we passed some transparency legislation a while back that actually equips you with the tools that you need to help us identify expense reduction items. And it was back in, I think it was 2011, I think it was one of the first bills we passed. And it requires all the agencies to put out their state spending plans in a way that actually provides tangible data for us to go off and do data mining. I take interns every single year and take the spreadsheet that they give us for each department and compile it into a single spreadsheet for that year so that you can go off and do some data mining and mixing and matching and sorting and identifying the best way to go off and reduce costs. And I break it out by core services, support services, and work projects, if you will. And you can help prioritize. So if they're saying we need $300 million, well, you can start prioritizing all the state expenses and say, all right, we don't need these bottom feeders, and that adds up to $400 million. Pick which one you want to get rid of. So you can actually help in this, and that's why I called the website here 10millionaccountants.com. If you go there right now, there's 10 million people in the state of Michigan. We can get the 10 million accountants to work on it. So next time you hear of a budget issue, go to 10 million accountants, look at the spreadsheet for the latest budget years and the trends that are out there, and provide suggestions to your elected officials to find ways to reduce expenses. There's a lot more information in there than you're going to find in any of the budgets. The next thing you can go off and do, and this is for the people that have insomnia, it's a comprehensive annual financial report. It is not the easiest read in the world. This is not Dr. Seuss, but there is a lot of good data inside of here, including balance sheets. So if you're worried about what our assets are as a state, what the liabilities are, if you want to find out all these 344 restricted funds and what they are. By the way, restricted funds, they like to say that you can't mess with that money because it's restricted, but there's this thing called a lawmaker that actually can pass bills that actually change restrictions on laws. You can change that, and you can put pressure on it and open them up. Also, you got retirement system information in there on pension liabilities, defined contributions, and a lot of budget stats in there as well. So I just want to make sure that For us to change this mindset around state spending, it's going to take a team effort, just like it did on right to work. It means that we're all going to have to get oars in the water. Try to make it, I hate to say this sometimes, but the more you make it an easy button for your legislators and say, here's some ideas that I've vetted and I've gone off and identified, here's another way of approaching this budget issue you guys are facing, and you make it easy for them, that helps out quite a bit. And so I just want to push that out there. In order to solve this state spending problem, it's going to be a team effort, and I just want to say thank you very much for your time and for your leadership too. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jerry Allen. I'm here on behalf of the leadership of Michigan Conservative Union, and we want to, while we have the opportunity, recognize the the accomplishments. Couldn't do that if I tried again. The accomplishments of Senator Pat Colbeck and his efforts on behalf of the state and his principled solutions. And so on behalf of Michigan Conservative Union, we have a leadership award, the Torch of Freedom, which we're presenting to him now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well deserved. Thank you. We have with us today one of the nation's leading conservative constitutional experts. Her name is Publius Hulda. She's a writer, a speaker, an author, and she's going to talk about Convention of States and some other topics this morning.
Thank you. The prospect of an Article 5 convention should make us tremble for the same reason it made James Madison, father of our Constitution, tremble. A convention gives the enemies of our Constitution the opportunity to get rid of it and impose a new one. Article 5 of our Constitution provides two methods of amending it. Congress proposes amendments or calls a convention to propose amendments if 2/3 of the states apply for it. The first method was used for the existing 27 amendments. Congress proposed them and sent them to the states for ratification. Under the second method, Congress calls a convention. We've never had a convention under Article 5. They are dangerous. And James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, 4 Supreme Court justices, and others warned against it. But the pro-convention lobby has been pushing for a convention for 60 years, ever since the Ford Foundation produced the Constitution for the new states of America. Read this proposed Constitution and tremble for your country. In the past, conservatives defeated the periodic pushes for a convention. So the convention lobby changed tactics. Now they are marketing a convention to appeal to conservatives. They are saying the only way to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government is to amend our Constitution, and we can only get the amendments to do that at a convention. So let's look at the Constitution they say must be amended to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. In the Declaration of Independence, we declared that a people have the right to throw off one government and set up a new one. Remember this, we'll come back to it. So when we ratified our Constitution, we created a new government, a federation of sovereign states united under a national government only for those limited purposes enumerated in the Constitution, with all other powers reserved by the states or the people. We listed every power we delegated to the federal government. Most of the powers are listed at Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 16. All our Constitution authorizes the federal government to do over the country at large falls into 4 categories. 1, military defense, international commerce and relations. 2, immigration and naturalization. 3, domestically create a uniform commercial system with uniform weights and measures, patents and copyrights, a money system based on gold and silver, bankruptcy laws, mail delivery and some road building, and 4, with some of the amendments, secure certain civil rights. That's it. All other powers are reserved by the states or the people. This chart, and email me, lists the powers delegated to the federal government. It's a short list. It's only with respect to the powers listed in the Constitution that the federal government has lawful authority. If it's on the list, Congress may make laws about it. But if it's not on the list, Congress usurps power and acts unlawfully when it interferes. So why did the federal government become Frankenstein? Everybody ignores the Constitution. Ignorance, along with the collapse of religion, morality, and personal responsibility, brought us to the brink of destruction. Because we forgot the federal government has lawful authority only over the enumerated powers, the federal government was able to usurp thousands of powers which are not on the list. State governments collaborated with the usurpations by taking federal funds to implement unconstitutional federal programs. To claim these problems can be fixed by amending our Constitution is like saying a wicked nation can be fixed by amending the 10 Commandments. But the Convention of States Project, COSP, says the problem is our Constitution, and we have to amend our Constitution to make the federal government obey it. They say amendments will limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, but our Constitution already limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government to those few and defined powers listed in the Constitution. So the claim that we can control those who ignore the Constitution by amending the Constitution is absurd. Mark Levin and Michael Ferris are aggressive promoters of the COSP. They say they want amendments to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. So let's look at their proposed amendments. Michael Ferris's Parental Rights Amendment delegates power over children to the federal government. Section 3 says, quote, "Neither the United States nor any state shall infringe these rights without demonstrating that its governmental interest as applied to the person, the child, is of the highest order and not otherwise served," end quote. Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments also do the opposite of what he says. His amendment to limit the federal bureaucracy legalizes what are now unconstitutional federal agencies: education, energy, agriculture, environmental protection, etc., etc., etc. Our Constitution doesn't authorize those agencies. They are not on the list. But Levin's amendment would legalize all such agencies for as long as Congress reauthorizes them. Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution says only Congress may make laws. But since Woodrow Wilson, federal agencies have been writing rules, the Code of Federal Regulations. All these rules are unconstitutional as outside the scope of powers delegated and as in violation of Article 1, Section 1. But Levin's amendment to limit the federal bureaucracy legalizes these rules for as long as Congress approves them. Levin's amendment to limit federal spending is also phony. Our Constitution limits federal spending to the enumerated powers. If you go through the Constitution and highlight all the powers delegated to Congress and the President, you will get a complete list of the objects on which Congress is authorized to spend money. That's how our Constitution limits spending. But everyone ignores it. Levin's amendment would substitute a budget for the enumerated powers and thus legalizes the current practice where Congress spends money on whatever is put into the budget. And while his amendment pretends to limit the amount of spending, the limit is fictitious because it can be waived whenever Congress votes to waive it. During September 2016, with great fanfare and hoopla, COSP held a simulated convention at Williamsburg, Virginia, to make us believe that at a convention called by Congress under Article 5, the delegates would not run away and write a new constitution, but would come up with wise amendments which would limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And they came up with 6 proposed amendments, 1 for term limits. Here are the others. 1 would make Congress's existing practice of spending on whatever they want constitutional for as long as Congress continues to approve increases in the debt. Another would delegate to the federal government dictatorial new powers over individual citizens, such as I witnessed in communist East Europe and the Soviet Union. It delegates to the federal government power over the movement or transportation of persons across state lines. That would provide constitutional authority for the federal government to do such things as require prior approval to cross state lines, require internal passports, as in the Soviet Union, establish checkpoints at state borders, and ban the use of privately owned vehicles to cross state lines. Yet those fools at the simulated convention voted for such an amendment. Another would elevate into law every order or dictate issued by anyone in the executive branch of the federal government. Another would authorize Congress to impose a national sales tax and a national value-added tax. And one would, like Mark Levin, legalize the regulatory administrative law state. The delegates to this simulated convention were primarily Republican state legislators handpicked by COSP, and they showed they are constitutionally illiterate, didn't understand what they were doing, and were steered by persons of insidious views who were present at the simulated convention. Michigan's delegates were Senate Speaker Pro Tem Lee Canfield, Kurt O'Keefe, and the Honorable Ken Bradstreet, and they voted for all 6 amendments. I wrote a paper on this COS project simulated convention, dog and pony, showing what they did there. So, would any of these amendments limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government? No, they do the opposite. They delegate new powers or legalize powers already usurped. It is impossible to rein in the federal government by amendments because amendments can't take away powers which weren't delegated in the first place. And when the feds violate the Constitution, they're ignoring the existing limitations on their powers. So the claim that we can get amendments to rein in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government is a huge con game. COSP says we must amend the Constitution because people in Washington don't understand it. Rubbish. Our Constitution is so simple. Alexander Hamilton said, the people are the natural guardians of the Constitution. Hamilton expected us to be enlightened enough to distinguish between a legal exercise and an illegal usurpation of authority. If it's on the list, the feds may do it. But if it's not on the list, they can't lawfully do it. For clauses the Supreme Court perverted, interstate commerce, general welfare, and necessary and proper clauses, we don't need a convention to draft amendments showing what those clauses mean. Just look it up in the Federalist Papers, but I've already done it on one page. Email me. COSP's whole case is based on a fabricated George Mason quote. They claim Mason said the Article 5 Convention was given to state legislatures as the remedy when the federal government violates its constitutional limitations, and that the states would need to make adjustments to the constitutional text in order to rein in the abuse of power by the federal government. Mason never said that, nor did any other framer say such a silly thing. James Madison kept a journal at the Federal Convention of 1787. I went through it and pulled out every reference to what became Article 5. I wrote it up. It's on my website. This is what really happened. Under the Articles of Confederation, our first Constitution, amendments had to be approved by the Continental Congress and all of the states. A dispute at the Federal Convention of 1787 was whether Congress, under the second Constitution being drafted, this one, should have any power over amendments. Mason wanted a method of getting amendments which didn't involve Congress. He said, if only Congress can propose amendments, the people won't get the amendments they want if Congress doesn't agree. So the convention method was added so delegates could propose amendments. Mason did not say that when the federal government violates the Constitution, the remedy is to amend the Constitution. Mason wasn't a silly man, and Mason and the others had just spent 4 months drafting a Constitution which delegates only a handful of powers to the federal government. So when the federal government usurps powers not delegated, they're ignoring the existing limitations on their powers. George Mason agreed that the purpose of amendments is to remedy defects in the Constitution. Madison's journal shows that on June the 11th, 1787, Mason said, "The Constitution now being formed will certainly be defective, as the Articles of Confederation have been found to be. Amendments, therefore, will be necessary, and it will be better to provide for them in an easy, regular, and constitutional way. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power and refuse their consent to the amendment. Our problem isn't a defective Constitution. Our problem is ignoring the Constitution we have." COSP claims Congress and the delegates have no power over the convention. State legislatures will run the whole show. They say state legislatures will appoint delegates. Each state gets one vote. It's a convention of states. And state legislatures can restrict delegates to considering only specific amendments. None of that is in Article 5. COSP made it up. What Article 5 says is that Congress calls the convention. A call is the official summons for the convention to take place. And Article 1, Section 8, last clause, delegates to Congress the power to make the laws necessary and proper to carry out its power to call the convention. The only power the states have is to ask Congress to call the convention. Once 2/3 of the states have applied, it's out of the states' hands. The April 2014 report of the Congressional Research Service shows that Congress also sees Article 5 as delegating to Congress exclusive authority over setting up the convention, and that in Congress's preparations for Article 5 conventions in the past, Congress has claimed the power to determine the number and selection process for delegates and has provided that delegates would receive immunity from arrest. COSP claims to know exactly how a convention will operate, but page 27 of the CRS report says, in the final analysis, the question, what sort of convention, is not likely to be resolved unless or until the 34-state threshold has been crossed and the convention assembles. So we'll have to get a convention before we know how it is going to operate. COSP says a convention is safe because 3/4 of the states have to ratify whatever comes out. That's not true. Remember, the Declaration of Independence says it's the right of a people to alter or abolish their form of government and set up a new government. We invoked that right in 1776 to throw off the British monarchy. In 1787, we invoked that right to throw off our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and we set up a new Constitution, this one which created a new government. How did we get from our first Constitution to our second Constitution? There was a convention to propose amendments to our first Constitution. The Continental Congress resolved on February the 21st, 1787, to call a convention to be held in Philadelphia, quote, for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, end quote. But the delegates ignored that limitation. They ignored the instructions from their states, and they wrote our second Constitution. And in Federalist Paper number 40, 15th paragraph, James Madison specifically invoked the precious right of a people to throw off one government and set up a new one as justification for what they did at the Federal Amendments Convention of 1787. You can't stop that from happening at another convention. If we have a convention now, George Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton won't be there. Who will be there? Constitutionally illiterate people such as those who attended the simulated convention and persons of insidious views to steer them to a predetermined outcome, which is almost certainly a third constitution. Now listen, a third constitution will have its own new mode of ratification. Our first Constitution required the Continental Congress and all of the then 13 states to ratify amendments. But our second Constitution, drafted at the Amendments Convention of 1787, provided at Article 7 that it would require only 9 states for ratification. If we have a convention today, there is nothing to stop delegates from proposing a third constitution with its own new mode of ratification. New constitutions are already prepared. The Constitution for the new states of America is ratified by a national referendum. The states are dissolved and replaced by regional governments answerable to the new national government. Here is the proposed Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. The Constitution 2020 movement is backed by George Soros and the Marxists. They want a progressive constitution in place by the year 2020. Do you know about the North American Union? During 2005, George W. Bush met on his ranch with the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Mexico, and they sketched it out. The three countries merge and a parliament is set up over them. This is the task force report on the North American Union by the Council on Foreign Relations. This erases our country. And Heidi Cruz was on the task force which wrote this report. They want a new constitution to transform us from a sovereign nation to a member state in the North American Union, and they need a convention to get that new constitution. The Convention of States Project says you don't have to worry about a new constitution because delegates can be controlled by faithful delegate laws passed by state legislatures. That's absurd. State legislatures can't revoke the self-evident right of a people to throw off their government and set up a new one. The delegates would be the sovereign representatives of the people attending a federal convention called by the federal government to perform the federal function of addressing a federal constitution. They wouldn't be under state authority. And as the sovereign representatives of the people, delegates would have sovereign immunity. And they can, like James Madison in Federalist number 40, invoke that right recognized in our Declaration of Independence to throw off the governments we have and write a new constitution which creates a new system of government. This is why brilliant men warned against an Article 5 convention. During April 1788, our future Chief Justice John Jay wrote that another convention would run extravagant risks. In Federalist number 49, James Madison said, "A convention is neither proper or effective to restrain government when it encroaches." In his November the 2nd, 1788 letter to Tuberville, Madison said he trembled at the prospect of a second convention, and if there were an Article 5 convention, the most dangerous partisans and individuals of insidious views would strive to be delegates and would have a dangerous opportunity of sapping the very foundations of the fabric of our country. In Federalist number 85, Hamilton said he dreads the consequences of another convention because the enemies of our Constitution want to get rid of it. Justice Arthur Goldberg said in a 1986 editorial, "It cannot be denied that the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 broke every restraint intended to limit its power and agenda, and any attempt at limiting the agenda at an Article 5 convention would almost certainly be unenforceable." Chief Justice Warren Burger said in his June 1988 letter to Phyllis Schlafly, "There is no effective way to limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention. After a convention is convened, it will be too late to stop the convention if we don't like its agenda. Justice Scalia said on April 17, 2014, I certainly wouldn't want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa, who knows what would come out of that? And the Federal Convention of 1787 and the Declaration of Independence show us that delegates can't be controlled. Are there violent partisans and individuals of insidious views among us today? Yes, and they want a convention. But the convention lobby says only moral and wise people will be delegates. Let's look at that claim. There are 3 ways to select delegates. Congress. Do you trust Congress to appoint moral and wise people as delegates? State legislatures. Do you trust state legislatures to appoint moral and wise people? Popular election. Do you trust the people to elect moral and wise delegates? Moral and wise people haven't been in charge of anything for over 100 years. The convention lobby has been able to mislead people because they don't know that our Constitution already limits the federal government to the enumerated powers. Because they don't know, they can be manipulated to believe that the Constitution is the problem. But amendments don't control governments which already ignore the Constitution. The First Amendment didn't stop them from banning Christian speech in the public square. The Second Amendment didn't stop them from regulating guns. The Fourth Amendment didn't stop them from spying on us without a warrant. The Fifth Amendment didn't stop them from uncompensated regulatory takings. And the 10th Amendment didn't stop them from usurping thousands of other powers. The 10th Amendment says all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or the people. What happened to those reserved powers? The states sold them to the federal government. The Pew Report says that for fiscal year 2015, 31.9% of the state's average revenue was from federal funds. The states aren't victims of federal tyranny. They go along with federal tyranny. They do it for the money, and all that money is added to the national debt. So what do we do? First, James Madison said, our Constitution depends on the people having the virtue and intelligence to select men of virtue and wisdom to office. But we lost our virtue and intelligence. We don't know these documents. We cannot be ignorant and free. Second, don't go along with the lawlessness. The Declaration of Independence says colonial legislatures opposed the king's invasions on the rights of the people. Today, state legislatures must oppose violations of our Constitution. Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison said, when the federal government does things which are not on the list, each state has the natural right to nullify of their own authority all such acts of the federal government. Nullification is based on the creator-creature relationship between the states and the federal government. Since the states created the federal government, they are the final authority on whether their creature has violated the constitutional compact the states made with each other. Those are our framers' words. I've written much about it. Nullification, the refusal to submit to unconstitutional acts, is the remedy our framers advised when the federal government violates the Constitution. So what's the push for a convention really about? We know our Constitution already limits the federal government to the enumerated powers. We know everyone has ignored our Constitution for 100 years. We know COSP's proposed amendments increase the powers of the federal government. We know that amendments can't control governments which ignore the Constitution. We know that delegates to a convention can't be controlled. We know that if there is a convention, a new constitution can be imposed. We know that new constitutions are already prepared. The establishment elite wants to move us into the North American Union. And the Koch brothers of Texas are spending vast sums of money to buy an Article 5 convention. The Marxists want their constitution in place by the year 2020. Read up on George Soros and Constitution 2020. Soros is also funding a push for an Article 5 convention. His excuse for a convention is to get amendments to overturn the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. Mega money is funding the push for a convention. I suggest they want a convention so they can complete their revolution against us and get a new constitution. And whether we are moved into the North American Union or the world federal government or get a Marxist constitution depends on whether the Kochs or Soros or somebody else buys the facilitators at the convention. James Madison said, "Our Constitution filled all Europe with wonder and veneration." Let's read and enforce this Constitution and downsize the federal government to its constitutional limits. Thank you, and email me for the exhibits. I have original source documents to back up everything. Thanks.
I want to say that Michigan is on record of supporting an Article 5 convention for a balanced budget amendment. We're already on the record for it. And that's getting very close to having enough votes to do it. It's something that's very, very dangerous. Every single Republican voted for it. Every single Democrat voted against it. We worked and worked very, very hard, and even friends in this room, senators are running for higher office. We love them, but they all voted for it. It's something that we have to change. Now, when Michigan gets 42% of its budget from the feds, do you think the state government is going to send people to the convention, if there is one, that's going to cut government? So that's one issue. But this lady here is the heart and soul of the movement, nationwide. We work with her on a regular basis, other states as well. And we got a little thing for you to take back. And it says, Publius Hilda, Mrs. Constitution, MiCPAC 2018. We want you to have it. Okay. Well, thank you very much. She's going to have to drive all the way back to Tennessee today, and so we wish her well on her travels. I thought I saw, you got a question here? What is email address?
PubliusHilda@gmail.com.
Where's Harry?
But I'm easy to find. And I live at my computer, so I answer questions.
Where's her advisor? He wasn't here now. No, he's not here either. Right, this.
Yeah, rescind. Last year, 3 states rescinded their outstanding applications for an Article 5 convention. The year before that, one state rescinded. I urge Wisconsin to rescind its outstanding applications for an Article 5 convention.
In Michigan, too.
What did I say?
You said Wisconsin.
Oh, well, I urge Wisconsin to do it also. Yeah, Michigan needs to rescind it.
Okay. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker.
Another question.
Why does Mark Levin push the Constitutional Convention?
I'm not on speaking terms with Mark Levin. I don't know. I understand that
I do.
he's sponsored by Americans for Prosperity. I think that's the case. And Americans for Prosperity is a Coke Front organization.
How many states have approved it now?
That's a hard question to answer. The power is delegated. A number of states have submitted applications, and applications have been being submitted since the 1700s. Congress has a stack of them. It is up to Congress to decide how they are going to count the applications. If Congress wants to, they can lump them all into one pile, but by state, and count all of those, or they can put all their applications for an Article 5 convention, for a BBA in one stack, for the Wolf Pack in another, for term limits in another, and count them that way. We don't know how Congress is going to count them. But understand, no matter what the ostensible purpose of an Article 5 convention, the delegates cannot be restricted to considering only that one amendment, because they have plenipotentiary powers and can do whatever they want, including scrapping the Constitution we have and drafting a completely new one. The Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force claims that they have 28 states. I don't know if that's accurate, but if that is accurate, and if Congress categorizes them in that way, then just a few more states, and Congress would be calling a convention. And it won't be limited to an amendment to balance the budget.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to have to cut off questions there. She might be around for a few minutes if you have personal questions.
I'm staying for lunch.
Our next speaker is a brother of a different mother and father. Dear friend, going back to the 1960s, when I was chairman of the Michigan Conservative Union way back in 75 through 81. He was the second vice president, became the third chairman of the Michigan Conservative Union. Most importantly, he has trained more than 50 college professors around the country in Austrian economics. One of the top stars in the economic world in the Austrian school, Dr. Harry C. Reiser.
Okay, can you, all of you hear me? Is this thing working? Yeah. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. I've always enjoyed coming to these events, and I want to talk about the economy. Let me just add a couple of things to what my prior speaker said about the Constitutional Convention. Number one is the French Revolution started with one of these things. And there's two times in history that did not have good results. One was the calling of the Estates General by King Louis XVI, which led to that horrible situation with the French Revolution. And the other one is in the Catholic Church with Vatican II. So I would urge you to try to stop any time a constitutional convention. I think after what I'm going to say tonight, or this afternoon, you'll see where we really don't need a balanced budget amendment. Okay, so I've entitled this Setting the Chessboard. the economic challenges during the presidency of Donald J. Trump. Next slide, please. As I see it, that, oh, you have this. Oh, great. Okay. Does it, please? Okay. The challenges for the administration are really 3 or 4, although there are a lot more, but I don't want to keep you here all day going through the economics. So I just picked out about 4 that are important. Okay. The first one is the increase in interest rates and entitlements. Number 2 is China and Russia, the One World Belt Initiative, which is very close to the gold-backed ruble and yuan, and then the concept of regulation. Now, if you just take a look at it, the federal revenues, one of the major problems we're approaching is we have $21 trillion worth of debt. If the interest rates, and the interest rates are going up, if you notice that, and they're going to have to go up. And the reason is because of the fact that the dollar has fallen about 19% in the last year. Now, my students asked me, they said, well, why does it mean that the dollar's fallen 19%? I said, take a look at your, when you fill your gas tank up. Because as the dollar falls, the price of gasoline will go up because of the fact that it tightens up the dollar on world energy markets. So what we're looking at is challenges for the administration because of the fact that the Congress does not seem to be able to control itself at this point. Although I think the control is coming, it's not coming from internally, but we are going to have external discipline. In fact, as China and Russia move towards a gold standard, that is going to have a serious effect, and probably for conservatives, a rather good one, because it'll force the United States to enter into relationship with a gold currency, which means there'll no longer be any more printing of money to cover budget deficits. And that is, it's interesting. Most people are angry at the Chinese and the Russians, but I think that the progressive movement may have died on the 23rd of March when China issued the gold-backed yuan. Okay? What's the problem is, by 2032, the way things are going, the challenge is this is what the federal receipts are. It gives you an idea of where the money comes from. And remember, as Edmund Burke said, a government is its revenues. Let me repeat that. A government is its revenues. And the question is where is this revenue going to go? Okay? Right now, at the projected rate, all revenue will go towards health care, Social Security, and net interest by the year 2032. That's at the present projection. That means there'll be no money for defense, no money for the federal courts, no money for anything else but those things. And of course, it's a trend that Mr. Trump is going to have to deal with, because as 2 things are going to happen in the future, as entitlements grow, and as they lose control of the interest rates, which they're doing now as it begins to rise. Because remember, if you have a $20 trillion, okay, at 2.5%, you know, you're talking about $400 billion a year in interest payments. Okay? I mean, that's significant amount of interest payments that have to be paid. And I think it's one of the reasons that these folks are hoping that a con can put the brakes on it. It's not going to put the brakes on it. Okay? The only thing that's going to put the brakes on it is a currency that they can't control. If we take a look at federal income taxes, we take a look at that, only about 50% of the American people are paid income tax at this point. The others pay it through buying products, and they're paying the corporate tax. Because remember, the corporate tax is paid for by consumers. When they tell you they're taxing General Motors or they're taxing IBM or whatever else, you can't tax the corporation. The corporation simply shifts the forward to the consumers or shifts it backward to labor or whatever else, but it's you who pay the tax. So you can take a look at the percentage of corporate taxes as a percentage of federal revenue. Now, the one thing I want to really talk about that nobody's really talking about right now is the One Belt, One Road initiative. Okay? And I think we are making a terrible mistake because we are relying on military assets. China is relying, and Russia, but China especially, is relying on commercial activity. I've been to China, and they continually talk about soft power. Every day I was there, they were signing trade agreements with another country. And so China now is doing what? Is using soft or economic power rather than military power. And China is building trade relationships throughout the Mideast, Africa. Friends of mine are consultants to companies. The Chinese are all over Africa signing what? Commercial agreements. We have not been doing that, okay? We've been relying too much on military power, and we have neglected the commercial side. And let me say this, the strength of America is the economy and the technological work we've done. It is not the military. The military is an after effect to the economy. And so my urging of this administration and any other administration is to open up commercial relationships. But they're in South America. They just had a major conference in February in Budapest in which China is signing up the Eastern European bloc and to connect that railroad. They're now sending 1,000 trains a year from China to Europe selling their products. And I don't see any effort on the United States to open up these commercial relationships. Now what we've been doing, and I'll show you the difference, this is our global reach of the U.S. military. So we've been building military bases around the world. And you can see all the places that we have military bases, okay? And most Americans would say, oh, this is wonderful that we have these military bases. Let me show you what the Chinese have done. This is the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road initiative. They are connecting rail links, and one of the things they're connecting to, and they will go through, is through Syria. Okay, you have to understand that the Chinese, if you take a look geographically, we always look at the thing called geopolitics. If they connect the railroad through Aleppo, and they, by the way, have signed the contracts to repair Aleppo after the war, and I've seen what Chinese do, okay? You will not, those of you who are younger will not recognize Aleppo. It will be full of skyscrapers and hotels and business, okay? And they'll connect it to that port that the Russians control. That'll give them access by sea to the Mediterranean and to all of Europe, okay? If you take a look at it, they're reaching into the South Pacific. This is the blue is their sea belt, and the red is the rail belt. And I've ridden on Chinese railroads, and believe me, it's like the difference between driving on German roads and driving on our roads, American roads in Macomb County. Okay, the roads are smooth, they're fast. Chinese railroads are very, very efficient. Notice that they're going to go into the Persian Gulf, and I'll show you a couple of other things. They're already going into Afghanistan with rail. They've opened up a large copper mine. Now you might say, is it bad for them to open up a copper mine? Absolutely not, because they're going to pour more copper onto the markets. Those increased copper on the markets are going to lower copper prices for us. So anytime you increase supply, you lower the prices across the board. I think one of the reasons, and I'll get into why Trump has these fakey tariffs, he really doesn't mean to put these in, by the way. He's trying to negotiate with them. Okay, that's the thing you should understand. That's why the market went down, went back up, and it's very volatile. But notice they are moving into South Asia, and if we take a look at it, another thing on the One Belt, One Road initiative, this is the member states of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Notice England's a member, okay? South Korea is a member. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, India, this is the counterpoise to the IMF. Okay, so what they're doing is establishing this infrastructure bank, and guess who will have the contracts to build the infrastructure? From the Chinese bank, Chinese companies. Okay, they're in Africa. I have a nephew who is in Tanzania, and the Chinese are in there building the railroad. And they told the Tanzanians, they said, folks, here's the situation. We'll build the railroad, we'll maintain the railroad, and we'll run the railroad. And the Tanzanians said, why? They said, well, you'd let the German and English railroads go to pot. You're not letting our railroad go to pot. Okay, Chinese have this kind of part of their DNA of building railroads. Okay, so they see wherever they're going, they build these railroads. But this is the important thing, that this is a major bank. This is a major bank, and it's having major effects throughout the world. And if you can take a look at it, all of them in brown are all the countries that are connected with this infrastructure bank. Okay? In addition, we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this is kind of a counterpoise to NATO. And if you can see there, it's the Chinese president with the, I think the president of either Pakistan or India. And they're making an arrangement, and this is how big this is. Okay? These are all the countries that are members, and read by the members. There are observers, those are in green. Okay? Occasional attendees, Afghanistan, and observers. And by the way, one of the countries that's joined them is Israel. Israel has joined up and is a member of this organization. So you're seeing the penetration, and we say that there's the cooperation in various areas. The SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what they'll do is they'll handle security, economy, transportation, culture, disaster relief, and law enforcement, plus economic and social cooperation. Okay. Also, they're going to they will fight against terrorism. Now, notice that and they will have joint anti-terrorist military exercises. So these countries are getting closer and closer together. Now, just to give you another example of what's going on, and this is things that Trump and American presidents are going to have to deal with. Okay. If you take a look at it, that is the track in the commercial corridor. 4,600 miles of trade route from China into where? Into Afghanistan, where they're opening up mines, they're opening up commercial relationships. And I think their chances of pacifying Afghanistan are a lot better than by sending American troops. Okay? We would say in Pakistan, this is the other corridor, they are coming in Pakistan. If you notice, this will give them access to the Persian Gulf. They'll be right at the tip of the Persian Gulf, and in, I think it's Kirkuk at Karachi, they're already building a naval base, as they are in Gwandar, which is more of a commercial base. Okay? The yuan and the ruble are set to compete with the dollar. Our dollar is really backed by oil. Now you'd say, well, why is it backed by oil? Because the agreement was that you could only buy oil with dollars, called the petrodollar. That strengthened the American dollar, because in order to buy the oil, you had to get American dollars, and then you could buy the oil. Qatar has now accepted petro yuan. As it opens up, the Saudis will begin to accept petro yuan, and that's going to put enormous pressure on the dollar. Okay? Notice theirs is backed by gold, and ours is backed by oil. Now, if you take a look at global reserve currencies, okay, and it shows you the countries that have that were the global currency. Portugal, for the first 80 years, was the global reserve currency. And then Spain, the Netherlands, France, Great Britain, about 105 years, the British pound was the global reserve currency. And the United States, we took over after World War I, We are still the global reserve currency. But see, what's happening is these currencies were backed by gold or silver. Ours is fiat, or backed by oil. And when you have fiat money, it isn't really backed by anything. Okay? Oops. Get this doggone thing. Let me put this here so it doesn't do that. Okay. So it's not backed by anything. Okay. If you take a look at the reserve currencies today, the United States is the major reserve currency, although the second one is the euro. China doesn't appear yet. It doesn't appear yet, but the question is it soon will be into that currency. Okay. Now, if we take a look, this cartoon kind of shows it all. We have the United States with fiat money, China with gold, and they're tossing them back and forth. So they're saying, we'll trade you gold for fiat and fiat for gold. And the major thing, I think, in the next 10 years will be the coming of the reserve currency. China now is the biggest purchaser of oil. They exceed us. And this gives you an idea of where they get their oil from. Notice they're buying oil all over the world, and they're going to go to these oil producers, and they're going to say, hey, fellas, we want to pay you in yuan. And they're going to say, well, what can you buy with yuan? You can buy all kinds of things from us with yuan. And you can trade us your oil, and guess what? We'll build hotels for you, we'll build railroads for you, etc. In other words, we're trading the Saudis with military equipment. They're going to go in there and promise consumer goods and market goods. Now, this is a very, very important step. And remember, one of the problems with China has been, historically, is that the British wanted to buy all kinds of tea from China. But the British didn't produce anything the Chinese wanted. So what did they trade them? Opium. And it led to the Opium Wars, and a tremendous problem. Okay? Everybody now has stuff the Chinese want. Oil and natural resources. Now, along that Silk Road are 80% of the world's resources in oil and in minerals. So it's a very, very important strategic step. And one of the things, I think it's been a terrible mistake. Now, I'm going to say some things that probably are not going to ring well in your ears, but I think these Russian sanctions have been a terrible mistake because it's just pushing Russia and China closer together. Okay? From an economic standpoint, one of the worst decisions. And we're just doing it because of the Syria thing. And the Syria war is lost. I mean, China's moving in there. Okay? Now, just take a look at what's happened. Would you want this as your reserve currency? In 1913, it's $1, and today it's worth 4 cents. Okay? And you can take a look at what's happened since the establishment of the Fed. Since the establishment of the Fed, the dollar's lost about 96% of its value. Well, if you're trading a currency that's losing that kind of value, and you're competing against a currency which is not losing any value because it's backed by gold, guess which way things are going to go? Okay? It's going to go to what? The stronger currency. Okay? This shows you the dollar is now used only in 40% of the payments, in global payments going back and forth. But with the Chinese currency coming on board, that is going to expand. Okay? Let me give you an example. What happens? And when we fought the Civil War, in order to finance the Civil War, the Union issued greenbacks, fiat money. Okay? But at the same time, they were circulating in the Union gold-backed banknotes. Well, what happened was, as the Union printed up more greenbacks, the value of the greenback fell against gold. So there was what we called the discount. Okay? And the more they printed, the worse it got. So what did they do? They outlawed gold. They taxed the state banknotes out of existence and closed down the gold market in order to maintain the currency. Okay? Now, we're facing the same thing. The only thing is we cannot outlaw, and we cannot outlaw Russia and China going on a gold standard. They're too big to invade. There's no way you're going to do that. So what happens is the greenback went down to about 46 cents. Now, saying this for the Union, in 1879, they finally did pay the greenbacks off with gold. So, I mean, one thing the United States did, it was one of the few times in history in which irredeemable paper money was paid off with gold. But the reason is because we had enormous economic growth. Okay? Now, if you take a look at it, what's happening here is, why did we back the dollar with oil after Nixon and Johnson, the two of them, broke the gold standard? Okay? Well, increased oil demand, since you have to buy oil with dollars, would be increased dollars, and it gave the United States an edge. I mean, we had an edge for the last whatever number of years, almost 50 years now, that we broke that standard because of the oil backing. And so the question is now that you don't need to have dollars to buy oil, you're going to have a situation where the dollar is going to lose value, and it has been losing value on currency markets. Now, this is the benefits, and we had enormous benefits because we had artificial demand for dollars. And see, what's happening, folks, is there's two forces working. One force is the production of goods and services. The other is the printing of money. What has saved us is that productivity here has kind of kept up, and technology has exploded. Okay, England was in enormous debt after the Napoleonic Wars. What saved England? The steam engine. Okay, it was the technology that saved Great Britain. It was the computer chip that saved the United States economy. But at this point now, China has computer chips, and the rest of the world has computer chips. So we have to take another very serious look at it. Okay, here are two of my not so favorite people in history, Nixon and Johnson. I don't have Johnson there, but I'll get to him. Departed from the gold and silver backing, Kissinger creates the petrodollar. The one thing you got to say about the Henry, he is a brilliant manipulator. Okay, like him or not, he's a brilliant manipulator, and he dreamt this petrodollar up, and it has kind of worked. Okay, if we take a look at the road to inflation, progressive Democrat Lyndon Baines Johnson signs the Coinage Act in 1965, removing the silver backing from the U.S. currency, reversing a law signed by George Washington in 1792. Now, Washington signed that law, and the penalties for tampering with the currency were capital punishment. Okay, you couldn't, if you were counterfeiting the currency or debasing it, you got taken care of. Okay, on June 24th, Johnson signs a sunset provision ending the convertibility of the dollar into silver. And on March 20th, Johnson signs a law suspending the gold backing for the U.S. dollar of 25%. Now, I tell my students, I say, I got an assignment for you. What is it? I said, why don't you go ask your parents and your grandparents how much student debt they had. They come back, well, Professor, they didn't have any student debt. I said, that's right. I said, you know why they didn't have any student debt? Because we were on the gold and silver standard then. We were able to work our way through college or help. It wasn't that expensive. And those of you who are my age can remember when we had silver coins in our pocket and gasoline was 2 bits a gallon of silver. Okay? They suspended this. Why? To keep this monster alive that we have going, where they think they can just print money to cover their deficits. And I think this is coming to an end. Okay? The petrodollar is really backed by oil, because it requires the oil to be purchased. That's ending. Okay? This will give you an example of what's happened with regards to income growth. The blue is 90% of us, okay? The red is the 1%, the wealthy. Now, the leftists are complaining about the distortion in income, and they're right. Take a look when it happened. While we were on gold up to 1971, the bottom was prospering, okay? And then, after they took us off, take a look at what happens. Immediately, the upper 1% are gaining. Now, if we had some time, I could explain to you. That's called the Cantillon effect. When you print money, the first people to get the money have the advantage. That's the Cantillon effect. If I were to ask you, I'm going to print a whole pile of money here. You want me to give it, how many of you want it first? Absolutely. Why? Because the prices haven't gone up yet. And what's happened is, if we could go into a long lecture on this, is that since we've been printing this money, where are the centers of wealth? They're not in making things. They're in Washington and New York, where these people are borrowing this money, going into the stock market, driving things up. Where, and when I show this map to my students, I said, take a look at this map. I didn't put this in because I know I don't have a lot of time, and you probably don't want to sit a long time for a long economics lecture, but I said, Washington, I said, here's all the counties that have been getting all kind of money and where income is rising. And here's the ones they aren't. I said, do you see any place on that that makes anything? No. It's Washington, where there's miles and miles of McMansions, and New York. It should be what? It should be Detroit. It should be places that make things, that do things. And this destruction has taken place. In my studies, every single country that's engaged in this inflation has lost their manufacturing base. Rome did, Spain did, Turkey did. The history is undeniable. And guess what? We engaged in it, and we lost it too. Okay? Now, take a look, because Trump's complaining about the trade balance. Now, folks, really, the trade balance is what they're lending us. Okay? Last year, we had a $100 billion trade balance with China. Where is that money? They lent it back to us. In other words, they're giving us money, they're lending us money to buy their stuff. That's what that trade balance means. Take a look at when the trade balance went south. We were actually under this situation. This here is not big enough. If you take a look, I wish I had a pointer, but take a look. 1970, we were actually shipping more stuff out of this country than we were bringing in. Well, there's a pointer. The green button. Okay, folks, okay, take a look here. 1971, right? Our trade balance is positive under the gold standard. Take a look what's happened to the trade balance under fiat money. Okay? You can just see exactly what's happened. And Americans are going, what it means is we're going further and further into debt. The explosion of debt since 1971 has been absolutely phenomenal. If I were going to, I say we don't need a constitutional amendment. We need a gold standard. Okay? We need to go back to that. And we can go back to it. I'll show you that. Okay, people who tried to do it, this is the petrodollar, which curves the dollar. Now, a few countries, leaders, have challenged the petrodollar and stayed in power. I mean, remember, folks, in politics, there's two reasons. There's the good reason and the real reason. Okay? You've been told that the good reason to go into Iraq and Libya is because they were dictators and some other nonsense. The real reason was they were challenging the dollar, the petrodollar. And they aren't going to be able to do that with Russia and China. That's over. Okay? And you take a look, this is what happened. Okay? And you trace the wars, right? Okay. Hussein dropped the dollar in 2000. Look what happened to him. Gaddafi dropped it in 2009. Look what happened to him. Okay? The fellow in Syria, Assad, dropped it in 2006. And there was a guerrilla wars that we fomented, okay? This is Putin, okay? But you're not going into Russia. Hitler tried that, Napoleon tried that. That's over, okay? The Chinese thing is over. Okay, China surpasses the United States as the largest crude importer. And China, I'm going to go kind of fast because I know the time. China now their crude oil benchmark is backed by gold. If we take a look at what's happening to the value of the currencies, I'm going to go kind of fast. The dollar index, notice the dollar has fallen about 20%. Notice what's happened with the renminbi, which is the currency, much more stable. Okay, it has become much more stable. All right, I'm going to do it if we say, if the petro-yuan supplants the dollar, oil importing nations no longer need dollars, the demand for dollars and treasuries drop, U.S. dollar declines, there'll be a dollar crisis, which will be higher inflation, interest rates will increase, and you'll have a debt crisis. Okay, that's exactly what Trump is fighting. Okay, the petrodollar is the big bet of Russia and China. Now I'll just give you the relationship. This is Russia. These are the, if you take a look, these are all of the pipelines that are being built to bring what? To bring oil to China and the other countries, the Trans-Siberian pipeline. You see what happens, folks, we think we can put sanctions and things. People find a way around them. They find a way around them. Okay, China does have a couple of weaknesses. Okay, one of the weaknesses is they got a lot of bad loans. They've got a lot of people in the business. They are going to have a housing crisis because they're overbuilt. The other crisis they have is it is a centrally directed kind of a mercantilist economy. It is not as efficient as ours. If we could just leave our economy alone, get rid of this cancer called progressivism, which actually started with Teddy Roosevelt. It's been a disaster. It's gotten us into wars. We haven't won a single blasted war. If you take a look at the outcomes, yeah, militarily, yeah, but we lost it politically and economically. And so what's happening is our weakness is getting involved in this stuff, but our strength is our economy. They have a weakness in their economy. Centrally directed economies are not as efficient, so we should not be afraid of competing with them. If you take a look at what's happening now, and I'm sure some of you are going to ask me, this here, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very dangerous sign. The yield curve, the difference between short-term and long-term interest rates is flattening. When that does, normally it portends a recession. Okay? I told all my students, when that thing reverses, get out. I got out in '99, I got out in 2007. Okay? This is, as I say, this here tightening of this yield curve, this is the difference between short and long-term rates, is a cause for real concern. If that reverses, get out. Get into cash. Okay? Okay, can we go on a gold standard? You betcha. Okay? Take a look at the United States metric tons of gold. We have more than Russia or China. We could easily go on a gold standard. If I were telling people, don't have a constitutional convention, okay, just back the dollar with gold and silver. Now, it may have to be a higher rate, but it'll bring a whole bunch of this stuff to an immediate halt, believe me. Okay, the U.S. dollar competes in world markets. It'll now have the same status as the yuan. Now, it will make deficit spending more difficult because somebody's going to have to tell my favorite New Yorker, Chucky, that, Chucky, you can't print any more money. We don't have the gold to back it. The game is over, okay? And it's going to portend about a 20% cut in the budget. To go on gold Now, all of you are going to benefit, but the federal government's going to take the hit because they're going to have to cut that budget about 20% because they can't print the money anymore. That's over, okay? Okay, long-term impact, changes in the money supply affect prices. Monetizing the debt, that's what we've been doing, means creating extra money to offset deficit spending in order to prevent interest rates. Okay, I'm going to move a little quickly because if you can take a look what's happened since we've gone off the gold standard. Now take a look at the end of Bretton Woods right here. Okay, this is what? The national debt. Okay, the amount of money printed and the price CPI. Okay, it's connected. What happened? We go off gold, national debt has soared. Consumer debt has soared. Student debt has soared. All right? Consumer price index has soared. We've been printing money like crazy. I told my students, I said, you know what, I know this is not going to go over well with some of you, but you know what the Iraq War cost us? $6 trillion. Okay? You know what $6 trillion is? It's 4 times the amount of student loans. We could have paid off the student loans 4 times. And I don't know what we got out of that. Okay, I think they want me to kind of end now. I was going to talk about regulation, but I know that you're probably going to have questions, and I'll be glad to take any of the questions that you have. And I'll leave they downloaded the PowerPoint, so you can send it out to people. Okay, does someone else do the questions, or do I answer? Oh. I know that some of this stuff is probably old hat to some of you who have been in the conservative movement. Okay. How does the increase in U.S. oil production affect the situation? It'll tend to bring oil prices down because the United States will no longer be buying oil on world markets, which means that as we produce more oil, remember the economic law, whenever any place you increase supply, you lower prices every place. So it will tend to have a moderated effect on the oil prices. It'll tend to bring oil prices down. However, it has to be above about $60 a barrel to make it cost effective. Okay? Aren't there historical tensions between Russia and China? Absolutely, but we ended those with the sanctions. They're now getting along. Okay? Nobody becomes buddies except has a common enemy. Okay? And that's what we did. We drove them together, which was a mistake. So we overcame the natural tensions. Could this derail the One Belt? No, it's not going to. The track goes through Russia. They're putting the track through Russia. Why? Because of this crazy idea that these neoconservatives have had. These neoconservatives, folks, are the heirs to the progressive movement. They were in the Democratic Party. They've now moved into our party. And it's a crazy idea of sanctions. It's not going to work. Okay. What does all this mean for our relationship with the Republic of Taiwan? How does Taiwan figure into this? Taiwan Travel Act, Taiwanese has passed. I think what happens is China doesn't really want to get into a rumpus over Taiwan. They expect at some point, maybe 100 years from now, for it to be like Hong Kong, to become part of but a separate entity. But they're very patient. They're not anxious to, from what I talk to Chinese, not anxious to do that, nor are they anxious, they are not anxious to upset the apple cart in any way. I mean, things are going good. How does U.S. affect the situation? I guess I've gotten all the answers. Any other questions? Anyone here?
We've got a few more questions here, but I think what I'm going to do is give them to you, and maybe you can write brief synopsis that we can put in the newsletter, and we'll send all the information out to you because we're just running time tight.
Okay.
And Harry, for you, we have a little award too. You are a tremendous inspiration to us, and this is the MCU Inspiration Award.
Okay, folks, we're going to get started because there was an academic side of me that says it's time to stretch, but there was a judge side of me that says, no, we stay on time, folks, and we are going to do everything we can to accommodate the speakers that come after me, too. What a blessing to be here today. Norm, what you do for our state and our nation so often is done in the quiet, behind the scenes, and then impacts us as a nation and as individuals in ways that we don't even begin to appreciate. So in addition to these type of things, like where we can have great speakers come and equip us to engage the culture, Norm, thank you for all you do every day, and all your team as well. What a blessing to be here. I left the bench and then went into the ivory tower at University of Florida and Western Cooley Law School and read a Supreme Court case one day that talked about, we're going to change the way we look at family, and we're going to change the way, we look at marriage. And in fact, we, the Supreme Court, know better, so we're going to actually redefine it and change the meaning of that for you. I read that case, though, as a constitutional lawyer, and saw that case was so much bigger than same-sex marriage. It really was about how we are going to govern our nation for the next century. And so my wife and I discussed it. 6 weeks later, we had made ourselves debt-free, and I left the world of financial security and full-time missionary to the culture now at Salt and Light Global, where we season the public dialogue with truth. And that's what I want to do for the next little bit that I have here with you, because I see we have in our audience, for example, young people from Michigan State University. They put on a spectacular debate a couple of days ago of the gubernatorial candidates, packed the room on a night where there was practically a blizzard outside. And there was more policy discussed that night than I'd seen at a debate in a long, long time. And so what I want to do for these guys is equip them to engage the culture as well. But I want you all to know that you stand on the shoulders of giants like Norm and folks that have come before you and have paid very, very large costs sometimes for standing for truth and for standing for what is right and helping others to be able to engage the culture. And so I challenge you guys, you men, young men and women, as you engage the culture, to know that we can change the course of this nation. People have done it before, and we can do it again. And that's what's actually happening at the Supreme Court. We've got a branch of government here that's supposed to work for us. They're politically accountable to us. They do a job interview with us every 2 years in the House and every 6 years in the Senate, every 4 years over in the White House. And then we got some folks over here, because we want to give them the proper amount of independence in our Constitution to decide disputes without being impacted by politics. We give them life tenure. But what do? They say, you know what? Thanks for that life tenure thing. We're going to start now doing your job as well, because, it's pretty hard to get rid of us. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is the current status of that situation, where these folks are appointed for life, but yet have on themselves to change the meaning of the Constitution. Now, we can debate whether or not we should have an Article 5 convention, and I thought there was a spectacular speech earlier this morning. But the bottom line is Article 5 provides the process if you're going to change the meaning of the Constitution. And I've got some real concerns with, the con. But what I've got even bigger concerns with is an unelected branch of government doing the same thing. Changing the meaning of the Constitution, amending the meaning of the Constitution to add new rights to the Constitution. For example, the right of personal autonomy and identity. I read the Constitution. I've been reading it since I was younger than you guys. And I read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, freedom of speech, and all my right to petition the government. And I look at my Second Amendment right to protect myself and my family with firearms. And I go on, I read, the Fourth Amendment, and it protects us from government on search and seizures, and the Fifth Amendment, and the right to due process. Wow. And I kept going and going and going, expecting when I was in college I was going to see this right of personal autonomy in there. It wasn't in there. But I was assured that it's a constitutional right. Well, how did it get there? Well, you got a few judges, lawyers wearing robes with ink in their pen, and they really truly believe they know better than we, the people, do, and they don't want us to use the Article 5 Convention to change it. So under the guise of judicial interpretation, they say, well, I found this word liberty, and I think I'm going to change the meaning of that to, it must be personal liberty, it must mean personal autonomy, and it must mean the right to kill an unborn son or daughter by a doctor. It must give a physician the right to kill an unborn son or daughter. It just must do that. Because doctors must have this right to be able to do that. In fact, it must even give a physician the right to kill somebody's unborn son or daughter, even during childbirth. I don't know if you know that, but in the Supreme Court, actually, after they did Roe versus Wade, they then had a government action that was designed to protect unborn human life as it was being born. The court struck it down, said, we've got this new constitutional right of personal autonomy. Doctor has the right to kill that baby. Wow. Where'd that come from? If you ask anybody on the left or anybody on the right, who would you prefer in your constitutional governance to be making policy that is so profound, decides whether or not human life can be taken or not? Who do you want to make that policy? Somebody that works for you, that you can hold a job interview and evaluate that policy 2 years from now? Or do you want to give that to somebody who, can't be removed from office very easy and certainly has no political accountability to the people? Well, if you even ask the farthest left person that question, they're going to say, well, I want somebody that's politically accountable to me to be making policy for the United States of America or for the state of Michigan or for that matter, Ingham County, Michigan, where we're sitting right now. As soon as they say that, well, so then you don't really support the power of the court to create this right of abortion for doctors to be able to kill unborn sons and daughters, and the right of same-sex marriage, and the right to engage in all kinds of sexual... Oh, yeah, no, I want that. But you see what we've just done? We've just changed the issue from that hot-button social policy discussion into a discussion about good governance under the rule of law and who should be making the policy. And so let me challenge each of you in here to think wisely. The good book says we're supposed to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And many times we can win the argument on the policy issue of good governance. Very often, though, I'm not saying we should sacrifice principle. I'm not even suggesting for a moment that we shouldn't be afraid to stand up and talk, because I think that's one of our larger problems, is that we whisper too much when the issue becomes a sensitive issue, or one that may cause us some consternation because we're going to get pushback from our professor or from somebody from the left at our work, or even our boss. The bottom line is, who should make these policies? And this is another talk, but I want to make sure that we don't forget about it, because there's another, branch of government that's not represented up here right now. And let me just picture it, because it's not in the Constitution. I'll just give you a blank sheet here so you can see this. It's the administrative state. It's the other folks, very often in here. Sometimes they're independent agencies, sometimes they're, executive agencies. But likewise, they don't have to face you for a job interview every couple of years. They have no political accountability at all, but yet they are making policy in this nation that is infecting you no matter what walk of life and what kind of job you have. And quite frankly, we need to hold some of the Republican members as well as the Democratic members of Congress accountable for that. because let me tell you why they like that and why they let that happen. What they will tell you is the United States has gotten to be too big a country, too big an enterprise for us to be able at Congress to run it. And so even though Article 1 of the Constitution says all legislative power is here, what we've now got in this nation, because a Supreme Court has authorized it over here, we've now got Congress giving the ability to delegate rulemaking and lawmaking power to somebody that you don't have to elect, or that they don't have to face in an election. And let me tell you why Congress likes that. Congress likes that because when you all get pissed off because all of a sudden it's impacting your religious freedom or it's impacting your pocketbook, your paycheck, and you go and you complain to your member of Congress, what do they do? They throw up your hands. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. That was the executive agency that did that law. Kind of convenient, isn't it? And you wonder why we had such a colossal movement in the electorate during the last election. It's because people like you are sharing the words in this document with other people, and we're actually reading the Constitution. We're understanding in this nation for the first time in many years just exactly how our government is supposed to work, and then we lay it next to how it's actually working, and we see a Supreme Court that is literally out of control. I don't want to say out of control. Let me, be a little firmer and say that it's acting like an imperial judiciary. It is acting like it doesn't have to face an election, but it can impose policy decisions and enforce policy decisions on we the people, and then not have to face any political consequences for doing so. A lot of places, at least when I was in, taking some political science classes, they would call it a dictatorship. Well, how did we get here? And for those of you that have seen me before, this part may be a little bit of review, but I was told by somebody when I said, should I show this thing again? Somebody, these people may have already seen, they said, no, show that over and over and over again. And even on the 9th or 10th time when they see this, they will share it with somebody else. How is it supposed to work? Well, our founders, when they created this great nation and they gave us this Constitution, they said, we come from a Judeo-Christian tradition, and we understand that the good book says that all have sinned and fallen short. And you know what? Politicians aren't exempted from that truth. And so, and by the way, I used to have students that would challenge me on that. Oh, no, we're born good, they would say. And at the very least, we're born with a clean slate, and and everything you are is a social construct between the ages of 4 and 9, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so over the years, I would have my class ask that question, are we born good or born bad? And 15 years ago, 90% would say we were born bad, because they would understand that. More recently, though, 80 or 90% would say, no, we're all born good, or at least with a clean slate. And I would generally see, often it was a young woman sitting on the side, sheepishly saying, no, we're born bad. And I would ask her, well, it's okay, be brave, I'll stand here to support you, I'll back you up. Why do you think we're all born bad? And she says, well, I know we were, I have children, and let me tell you, they weren't born good. And for those of us that have kids, we've seen that. And you can demonstrate that. Pretend this is a rattle. Give a rattle to a little child, and they like to play with it. Now introduce a second child, and the second child crawls over and says, can I partake in your rattle playing? Does the first child say, oh yes, we were born good, let me share this with you and we will play so happily together? No, it doesn't happen, does it? The first child says, no, it's mine. You all just said, no, it's mine. You know what? I've done that scenario, not necessarily with a rattle, but all over the world, in cultures all over the world, at almost every continent. And I've done that little scenario, and sometimes I use the word keys, or sometimes I ever use what was ever culturally significant for little children. Every mother in the audience say, "It's mine," in whatever language. This isn't a cultural social construct. This is a self-evident truth. We're born bad. Our founders understood that. And so the first thing they did was they divided power. They divided the power in this nation, and this power cord is going to represent the exercise of power. And they say, we're not going to give it all to one branch because we know that all have sinned and fallen short. And those little babies that play with the rattle when they are little, they grow up and they exercise power in buildings like these when they're adults. So we're going to separate that power. And we're going to limit it very much so. And we're going to say, if you're going to exercise power, you first have to plug into a power source. And so we're going to list a few plugs for each one of these branches of government. And if you want to use power, you've got to plug into a power source. Congress has the power to plug into the commerce power among the states. Congress has the power to plug into the postal power. The reason that your mail gets delivered is because Congress has the power of the post. The President's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's why he can send military forces overseas. But only because they have a power source that they can plug into first. Now, even the way it's supposed to work, and the way our founders brilliantly put it together, they said, you know, even if you have a power source, there are some self-evident truths, some liberties that are so very important that even if you are exercising power that you've been authorized to exercise, if you interfere with those liberties, we're going to strike that power down. If you, for example, use your power to interfere with the right of religious conscience, or the right of freedom of speech, or the right to petition the government, or the right of due process, or the right to defend yourselves, we are going to look at that law so closely, and we're going to hold it to the highest standard under the law, and if you don't meet that higher standard, we're going to strike it down. Why? Because you are using your power to interfere with one of our fundamental rights. That's the way it's supposed to work. And for many years, it did. And so if government used its power to interfere with your religious conscience, even if they had a constitutional power source properly plugged into, the law would be struck down. Let me give you an example. The Affordable Care Act, now embraced by both sides, I suppose, as Obamacare. They being Congress, had to have a constitutional power source before they could make that law, correct? Otherwise, they wouldn't be acting within their constitutional authority. So they said, well, medical care, it's not the postal power. What can we use? How about commerce, they said. You know, it must be commerce power. We can regulate commerce among the states, so the medical profession, that must be, and so they passed the Obamacare under using their commerce power. Well, that exercise of power was challenged by the Supreme Court, and I don't know how many of you young people saw this, but did you know the Supreme Court struck down and said Obamacare was unconstitutional? They said it is a violation of the commerce power. It is not within the scope of the commerce power. If you didn't, don't be surprised, because it was on page 46 of the New York Times in very, very fine print at the bottom. And the reason you didn't hear about it is because the story they did write about is they said, well, you know what? The president, if he's not anything, he's smart enough to have a good lawyer, and good lawyers always have a backup argument. And so the backup argument that the president's lawyer, when they argued the case, was they said, you know what? If it's not the commerce power, you know what it really is? It's a tax, because in the power, in the Constitution, the Congress has the power to tax. Now let's not say that very loud, because it would be the largest tax ever imposed on the American people. And so when that went to the Supreme Court, a majority of the court said, yep, IRS can fine you even. You know, it's handled through the IRS. It looks like a tax, it smells like a tax, and just like a duck, if it swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a tax. So guess what? Congress had the power to pass the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Now remember what I said though, even if you have an appropriate power source, and you are exercising that power in a way that is interfering with one of our fundamental rights, what does the court do? The court looks at it very closely, right? Because they're using the power that we've delegated to them in the Constitution in a way that's interfering with our rights. So what the Supreme Court does is they pull out of the closet a very special Supreme Court microscope. And they take that microscope and they put the law that's interfering with one of your fundamental rights, one of your inalienable rights, and they put it under the Constitution. Or I'm sorry, they put it under the Constitution, but they put it under the constitutional microscope. And they look at it very closely. And if that law that is interfering with your unalienable right, it cannot meet that very highest standard of law in the American constitutional legal system, the law gets struck down. So let me tell you what happened. One of those agencies over there that I had been telling you about, that doesn't exist in our Constitution, but yet has the power to impact lives, impacted one of the lives of one of our clients. For example, we represent a business in Florida, a very large business, very important to the infrastructure of the United States. His business provides electricity and helps support the grid. Well, guess what? His one mistake. He was a Christian. And he says, you know what? When I run my business, I will not participate and assist in abortions of the people that work for me. And so the previous administration came in and threatened him to be fined millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, to put him out of business. We represent him right now. We've got an injunction by the court. And I was in Washington a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago at this point, and I was in a room with, the Attorney General Sessions, and we can talk about his good and bad parts. But right now I want you to write a letter to him for me. Because he promised and assured everybody on national television that we were going to settle all those suits. And guess what? Many of the suits were settled, but they weren't settled in any way that would protect businesses in the future from a different administration. And so our guy says, no, I want this clear that nobody's going to be able to come back and be able to use the power of government to find my business out of existence unless I participate in abortions with my company. And so I said, man, if you're willing to stand up and have that kind of conscience and that kind of, determination to stand up for truth, we're here for you and we're going to represent you for free. Right now, and again, this is one of the best administrations we've had to work with in years, well over a decade now. We still haven't gotten the administrative deep state to agree that what they are doing is interfering with the First Amendment's right of religious conscience, not to mention statutory rights of we have statutory rights that protect religious conscience as well. Wow. How can somebody that's unelected in the Supreme Court, an agency over here that's unelected, have so much influence and cause so much misery to conservatives in this nation? Well, it's because for so long we let it happen. But I'm happy to report that as I speak around the country now, this is not happening anymore. We are standing up, we're speaking truth, we're doing it in a respectful way, but we're not backing down. And that was my challenge to you guys, your young people again. You're going to have professors that are going to maybe treat you fairly, but they'll be coming from the far left, and in their writing they're trying to undermine everything that you stand for. Or you may run into professors that are worse than that, where they're not only doing that in their writing, but they will punish you someday at your school. I haven't heard too much about that happening at in your particular department that you're in. Other departments at MSU, it's happening right now big time in a very, very bad way. Your job is to be unafraid and to, in a respectful way, engage the culture. But do it in a way that our ideas are just as valid as somebody else's. And that brings me to the next point in our current status of our Constitution. and I'll bring it around in connection with some stuff that's happening in Michigan. How many people have heard about this guy that's going around Michigan looking for every cross he can find that's associated with any government property? And kind of like Paul in the Bible went around to city by city looking for Christians to kill. That's what this guy's doing. He's going city by city, and he's looking for crosses, and then he finds the ACLU or some group like that to sue to try and put these small little townships, bankrupt these townships unless they take the cross off. Happening all over the place. Well, how did that happen? Because they say it violates separation of church and state. It violates the Establishment Clause. Now, wait a minute, folks. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It doesn't say Congress shall not allow, or local government shall not allow a cross on a property. It doesn't say that you have to kick baby Jesus off the courthouse steps every Christmas just to make sure that we're not violating the separation of church and state. The word establishment at the time the First Amendment was written means pretty much the same thing it means today. You can't establish a religious government. We can't have Sharia law like Iran. All right? What the court did, though, because they had some folks that said, we'd like to be able to push this idea of Christian ideas to be able to participate in policy making. We want that completely out of here. So we want you to change the word establishment to mean endorse. And so right now, the Supreme Court, in the 70s, they came down with a decision that hasn't been reversed, but hasn't been used a lot either, that says if you are going to use power government in any way, write a law, make a policy, put a cross on property, any government action has to have a secular purpose. You have to have a secular reason for doing so. You can't even symbolically endorse religion. And so guess what? All these crosses on government property, they don't establish Christianity as the government of the United States requiring that all our legislation be consistent with Christian tenets, does it? So it shouldn't violate the Establishment Clause. But what they're doing, instead of pointing to the Establishment Clause itself, they point to a decision by the Supreme Court that says, well, we're going to change the meaning of that clause to say you have to have a secular purpose. You can't even symbolically endorse religion. And so now guess what? These crosses that are being attacked last week and the week before, now somebody says, well, that at least symbolically endorses Christianity. That's the symbol of Christ. And at that point, I'm going to share the gospel with them, and so maybe we'll save them. But that's, and so now they're saying we can't do that. We can't do that. Again, an unelected court changing the meaning of the Constitution. Now, what has that got to do with the Supreme Court case that we're working on right now in the Supreme Court? We represented the first time around state legislatures and members of Congress. This time around, we're coming in and, because this is the second time the national security travel ban's been challenged. If you can't show that you're safe coming in, that you're not a terrorist, and we did a great big investigation to determine which countries could do that and which countries couldn't, then you don't get to come in if we can't know that you're not a terrorist or not. That's a very short and I think fair summary of the national security travel ban produced by President Trump. That travel ban is being challenged under the same terms of the Constitution as these crosses in Michigan. What they're arguing is that President Trump, during his campaign, made some comments about Muslims. And he said, that shows that you don't have the proper intent. You must have a religious intent. You don't have a secular intent. And you start to scratch your head. You say, wow, how do these people come up with these ridiculous arguments? They sound so ridiculous that when my kids were little homeschool kids, they would have laughed at that. But they get local district trial court judges saying, oh, sounds good to me. Unconstitutional. So now it's in the Supreme Court for the second time. And they argue that the national security travel ban has to be struck down because it violates the religion clause. because it doesn't have a secular purpose. Can you imagine if that judge-made doctrine was in place during the Lincoln administration? The Emancipation Proclamation would be unconstitutional. Why? Because Lincoln invoked the favor of Almighty God, not in a speech when he was running for office, but in the very document itself. Do you see how far we've come? See how far we've come. How much time do I have? 4 minutes. Okay. Let me bring this to a close then, because what I want to use, because I had a great evolution of real bunch of crap that the Supreme Court's done as well in some other areas. But what I want to do now in this last 4 minutes is show you what can be done and what we the people and what we conservatives can do. Remember we talked about power sources? Congress has some power sources that it can use to check the federal judiciary. The first power source that Congress has, we talked about the power to tax. Well, along with the power to tax is the power to spend. So after they take our taxes, they go through this appropriations process and they spend that money. Well, a lot of that money goes to pay for all that marble you see right here. And inside that marble, I was there last week, is a whole bunch of mahogany and a whole bunch of really fancy, libraries and computers and highly paid law clerks from the very best schools in the country and support staff. And you know what? What if Congress one day said, federal government, until you start acting within the scope of Article 3, within the scope of your proper authority, and stop doing our job over here in making policy, we're going to defund you. Now, the one thing they can't do is lower the salaries of the judges because the Supreme Court, because the Constitution says you can't lower the salaries. But all that other stuff is fair game. And the next thing they can do is Congress controls the jurisdiction and the size of the court. Under the Constitution, the only thing in the Constitution is that the federal judiciary has to be a Supreme Court. It doesn't even say how many members, and we've had different numbers. So if Congress wanted to fully exercise its power tomorrow, the entire federal judiciary could be Chief Justice Roberts and his desk. Think of all those trial courts, those federal trial courts that have, undid the will of 2.7 million people in the marriage case when they said our constitutional amendment was no good. When one judge, one sitting federal judge did that. I would haul that, if I was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee or the chairman of Government Operations Committee, I wouldn't file an indictment for impeachment yet, but I would haul that judge in front of me. And I would ask him where he got that constitutional authority in Article 3 to do what he did. Can you imagine if we had the courage of some members of Congress to hold hearings like that? Just holding the hearing, just scheduling the hearing would be such a shot across the bow of the Supreme Court. Now again, we got to we got to be wise as serpents, and we got to be able to, we can't be reckless when we do stuff. There is another constitutional power source that Congress has. And I call it the hammer, and this is probably the less political feasible one, but Congress has the power in the House of Representatives to impeach a federal judge. And in the Senate of the United States, they have a power to remove a federal judge. Now, the Constitution, Article 3, requires these folks in the judiciary to be acting with good behavior. I'm telling you, if you're acting outside the scope of the authority that's been given to you and you're changing the meaning of Constitution and you're imposing policy on millions of dollars, on millions of people involving millions of dollars, and taking that power away from these branches of government, I think that's bad behavior. And in my view, these are impeachable offenses. And I'll finish. Let me step back to the one before that, because it's probably not politically feasible to tell Congress, even if they have the power to do so, to remove all the federal judges and end the judiciary. But you know what? If they have the power to do that, which they clearly do in the Constitution, the Supreme Court has upheld it, the other thing they have to do is they could strip part of the jurisdiction of the court away. And the Congress has done that on a fair amount of times, and they've done it successfully, and the Supreme Court's even recognized it and actually bowed the knee and acquiesced. And so, for example, let me think of one of the latest times was when Congress passed the law, how many times you could appeal if you were a prisoner. And Supreme Court struck it down. Congress then stripped them of the jurisdiction to hear that. Supreme Court said, well, we can't do it anymore. We can't decide this area of the law. Well, how about they start doing it in the area of abortion, religious freedom, and some of these other areas as well, and restore good governance and the rule of law to this nation. God bless you guys. Thank you for listening.
We are so proud to have Judge Michael Warren here with us today. He's a justice on the Oakland County Circuit Court, and he's also co-founder. How many of you have heard of Constitution Week? Patriot Week, yes. Okay, well, Judge Michael Warren.
Good. Still the morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. You can hear me. Can you hear me now? All right. It just switched on. Good morning. If you like what I have to say, I have a 15-second commercial. I have a little table over there, the Patriot Week brochures, and the book from which much of what I'm about to say, written by me, is over there for sale. Free autographs, $15 though for the book itself. And there's also a sign-up sheet for those of you that are interested in Patriot Week, where we will send you emails. We do not abuse that privilege. We understand we don't like spam and all that kind of thing. So, but if you're interested, please stop by the table. I'll be there through the late afternoon at least. If you are a patriot, if you think you are a patriot, I'd ask that you stand up. All right, we have a room full of patriots. Give yourself a round of applause. You can be seated now. Now you might be asking yourself, why would I do that? Well, I think that most people think of themselves as patriots, and I'm here to talk about patriotism today, so I want to start with the definition of patriotism. Merriam-Webster says, love for or devotion of one's country. OxfordDictionaries.com says, a person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. The preeminent English writer Samuel Johnson said, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. Aldous Huxley said, one of the great attractions of patriotism, it fulfills our worst wishes. In the person of our nation, we're able, vicariously, to bully and cheat. What's more, a feeling that we are proudly virtuous. George Bernard Shaw said, patriotism is your conviction that this country is superior to all the others because you were born in it. And we have some very different versions of what patriotism means, right? Bertrand Russell says, patriotism is the willingness to kill and be killed for trivial reasons. Thoreau said, patriotism is a maggot in their heads. Oscar Wilde said, patriotism is the virtue of the vicious. Tolstoy said, patriotism is the principle that will justify the training of wholesale murders. Mark Twain said, patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. Thought that might ring a bell. Teddy Roosevelt, I think, gets us closer to the mark. Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. It is patriotic to support him insofar as he efficiently serves the country. It is unpatriotic not to oppose him to the exact extent that by that inefficiency or otherwise he fails in his duty to stand by the country. In either event, it is unpatriotic not to tell the truth, whether about the president or anyone else. And the last quote I have is from George Washington. Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. So I think what we're learning from these quotes is that there's a virtuous patriotism and a dark patriotism. The Nazis were very patriotic Germans. So were the imperialist Japanese, and so were the Viet Cong, right? Great patriots. But we would not consider that to be virtuous. So I've made up a different definition for Americans. Patriotism is the love of country and fervent belief in America's founding first principles as articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embedded in the Constitution. I'm going to say it again. Patriotism is the love of country and the fervent belief in America's founding first principles as articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embedded in the Constitution. And if you look at patriotism in that extent, then this is the core. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to establish new government, laying its foundation such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Those words from the Declaration of Independence were revolutionary in 1776, and they remain revolutionary today. And despite the controversy about America and our role on the world stage, America's always been controversial on the world stage, we remain a beacon of hope, a torch of liberty for billions of people across the world. Most people in the world live in countries where they wish their country was more like ours. Some people are so disgusted with their country, they'd rather just leave and come live here. And some people despise us so much they're willing to blow themselves up just to hurt our innocent civilians. And whether they love us or hate us, they're all motivated by those founding first principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embedded in the Constitution. The rule of law, unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government. That's what makes America America. It is not as fun as it might have been to watch March Madness and U of M going to the final. It is not Pokemon Go. It is not Miley Cyrus in her twerking. It's those founding first principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embedded in the Constitution. That's what makes America America. So by that definition, how are we doing? If you have to understand the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, we're doing really bad. 2/3 of our students scored below proficient on the last National Civics Assessment Test administered. Over 67%. Less than half of 8th graders know the purpose of the Bill of Rights. Only 1 in 10 had age-appropriate knowledge of the system of checks and balances. 77% of college seniors do not recognize James Madison as the father of the Constitution. 78% of college seniors fail to recognize the words of the Gettysburg Address. Only 28% of the public and 5% of private colleges and universities require even a single broad survey course in American history and government. 75% of Americans cannot articulate the 3 branches of government. 75% cannot tell you the 3 branches of government. But 3 and 4 can name the 3 Stooges. Over 40% of citizens fail the citizenship test given to the immigrants to become citizens, and that's an easy test. 75% of citizens could not explain why we fought the Cold War. We got some Cold Warriors in here. It's not any better in Michigan. And a recent survey about young people revealed that only 15% believe, this is like the millennial era, only 15% believe that the U.S. is better than other countries. So 85% think we're just like any other country. Now, this is a huge problem because as a free people, we are responsible for our our freedoms and liberties. And Abraham Lincoln recognized this a long time ago, and he said it this way: "At what point then is the danger to be expected? I answer, if it is ever to reach us, it must spring up from amongst us. It cannot come from overbroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide." Osama bin Laden or ISIS did not launch an amnesia bomb over the United States and wipe out our collective memory of our history and our civics. We have done that to ourselves. These are self-inflicted wounds. That is suicide. There are a lot of reasons why we got here. And I'm not going to go through them all, but they are in the book. They deal with the media, they deal with our political class, they deal with our education system. There's a whole slew of reasons. I want to talk to you about one that's pretty unique. I know some of you have heard about this because you've heard about Patriot Week, but it's worth remembering. So to give you some background, my father is a Jew, although he's really an atheist, and my mother is a disaffected Catholic, and I was raised as a nothing. My dad would always say, "Mike, you can believe anything you want, just remember it's all bullshit." So I was a very vigorous, you can see how shy I am, I was a very vigorous, outspoken atheist for many years. And then I went into high school, and I learned about a lot of other religions. I said, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not, maybe there's Hindus, maybe there's the Greek Pantheon. I'm not sure. I became an agnostic, and I was agnostic for a very long time. And then I went into law school, of all places, in Ann Arbor. My third year in law school, the Holy Spirit found me, and I converted overnight, much to the shock of my family. Thank you. I called my little Italian grandma up, said, "Grandma, you're going to take me to church one day." It's a Sunday. She goes, "Michael?" I go, "Yes." She goes, "Is this a joke?" I said, "No, you're going to take me to church." We go to church, I end up converting. Why do I tell you that? Because as an adult convert, I had to learn about this thing called the liturgical calendar. Liturgical calendar. We're in the Easter season. We just went through Holy Thursday, and Good Friday and Easter. There's Pentecost, there's Advent, there's Christmas. Why do we have all those days? To stop in the hustle bustle of our day and renew our faith. All the great religions do that. And America used to have a civic calendar. We have Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, and Thanksgiving. Why? To renew our faith in America. But what have we done with those days? Last time, when we declared independence, John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail that the anniversary of that day be forever remembered in America. It would be celebrated with fireworks and bonfires and parades and illuminations in the sky. And he was right. We still do that on July 4th. But he also said it should be a solemn day of devotion for the blessings of liberty. It ought to be solemnized. I don't know about you, but last time I had a hot dog at a July 4th party was not a particularly solemn occasion. We have hollowed out, commercialized, and cheapened all of our civic holidays. I was explaining this to my 10-year-old daughter at lunch one day, and she said, "Dad, that's wrong. We need to do something. We need to start a new celebration for America." So we created Patriot Week. It begins on September 11th, ends on September 17th. Each of those days we celebrate a founding first principle from the Declaration of Independence, key documents and speeches that embody that, founding fathers and other great patriots, may they come alive in America, and flags from our history. There is a lot of information on our website at patriotweek.org. I really can't, it is very grassroots. You can do it at your church, your Kiwanis, your Chamber of Commerce, your local political party, at your school, parades, whatever. All kinds of guest speakers. We have a National Library Initiative. There are many, many things that we do. But that's only one part of the whole story. If you want the whole story, you need to get the book. I will leave you with this. Our country is in grave danger. It's in grave danger because we, not necessarily the people in this room, you are the salt of the earth, but we, writ broad, have allowed us to get to this sorry state. And the forces of history hate America. They hate freedom. They hate liberty. They want to squelch it and extinguish that lamp of freedom, that torch of liberty. It's up to us to stop that. If we don't, we're going to go in the abyss just like every other country. And we'll lose our freedoms and liberties. It's up to you to make it happen, to save our country. God bless you, and God bless America.
Our next speaker comes to us from the great state of Indiana, Emory McClendon. He's a national Tea Party spokesman, and he's going to talk about the Tea Party movement today. Personally, I haven't really been involved in politics much myself, but back in 2009, the Tea Party got me excited, and I got very involved at the time, and then kind of moved away from it. And I think we're going to hear some words that will inspire us to move forward from this point on.
Can you imagine sitting here today what America would be like if one Hillary Rodham Clinton would be going into her 15th month of the presidency of the United States of America? Imagine that. I don't want to imagine it, and I'm sure a lot of you don't want to imagine it. So let's go back a little bit. It was election night, November the 8th, 2016. It was a night that surprised everyone, including the Democrats, because they thought that their candidate, Hillary Clinton, would be a runaway shoo-in for the presidency by a landslide over one Donald Trump. Thank God it didn't happen. The announcement came late in the night, and Donald Trump had been elected as our 45th president-elect of the United States of America. The message of conservatism had prevailed over progressive doctrine. The people had heard the message of a businessman who promised us that he would drain the Washington, D.C. swamp and return the government to the people. And that was the cry of the Tea Party movement. We were taxed enough already. We were sick and tired of the government going astray, and we wanted to bring it back. 8 years of the Obama administration's aggressive anti-American policies would soon come to an end because of Donald J. Trump. The time had come for conservatism to return to America under an era of a new president who would seek to make America great again. Can you say that with me today? Make America great again. The opposition, including many in the president's own political party, announced that they were not ready and that they would be willing to do all that they could to stop his agenda. The Republicans have been given all three branches of government, but were somehow conveying the message that they were not willing to work with Mr. Trump toward his conservative agenda. Many Americans were waiting with eagerness for the inauguration to take place on January 20th, 2017. It was slated to be the dawning of a new era for our nation. The battle lines were drawn, and the president came out swinging. Throughout his first 90 days in office, he kept campaign promise after campaign promise and showed the nation and the world that America had a new sheriff in town. Now, our nation was founded upon sound principles and a strong constitution, which was also confirmed in our Declaration of Independence. And it is because of these principles and our rule of law that America has prospered. America's new president believes in the American dream, our founding principles, and the conservative message. He set out to repair the damage done to our economy, our infrastructure, our military, our image, and our government by the previous administration. The task at hand would not be easy, and it would take a strong leader to stay on track. Thank God for the art of the deal. I wonder how many of you realize the importance of what our president is doing. Do you really understand what is at stake for America? During the prior 8 years, we had witnessed some of the most corrupt activities in the history of our government by the Obama administration. Those who are behind this attempt to transform our nation have not given up their fight to destroy our republic. They continue to undermine and sabotage our government. Why is it? Why is it that they hate our founding principles so much? Have you ever asked yourself that question? And why is it so important for us to resist them with every ounce of energy that we have at our disposal? These are questions that we need to consider with deep concern if we really want to preserve and restore our nation and continue to be the greatest influence of freedom and liberty that the world has ever experienced. I know that I want America to continue to prosper. Do you? Do you? Let us take a brief look at what our founders gave us when they formed our nation. I speak mainly of our U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Now listen to this. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them into separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Now let's notice something. Let's notice that the founders considered themselves to be first and foremost one people. They were unified. They also considered themselves subject to laws that are the laws of nature and of nature's God. They stressed that these laws are not man-made or given to us by government. It is equally important for each of us to realize these facts in the era of President Trump as we defend conservatism during his presidency. We must continue to realize that we are accountable to ourselves and, most importantly, to Almighty God. We are accountable to Almighty God to secure the blessings of liberty into the future. We must always keep in mind that it is He who is the provider of our liberty, not the government. The deep state and those involved in the progressive movement would have us to bow down to man and look to government for our freedom and liberty. We cannot allow that lie to prevail. The founders go on to spell out that these rights are self-evident and that they are endowed by and that we are endowed with certain unalienable rights. They go on to say that among these, and I mentioned it before, and it's been mentioned before today, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all want to live. We all want happiness, and we all want to continue in our liberty. However, these nefarious people didn't stop here, nor did the founders. They also pointed out to us the remedy for a tyrannical government. They stated that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers, their just powers, from the consent of the government, of the governed. And that's you, and that's I. We must stand up for our rights, for our freedom, and for our liberties. And part of that standing up has come through us as grassroots people as we marched with the Tea Party movement. How many of you marched when that movement started? And we're continuing to march. We have changed our tactics in that we're educating. We're going to visit Congress. We're doing other things. But we still cherish our freedom, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. We must continue to walk in the founders' footsteps even today, and in their ideas during the era of conservatism under President Trump. If we fail to do so, America will be lost, and our Constitution and founding principles will be destroyed. This cannot, this must not be our final destiny. Do you agree? My fellow patriots, my plea to you today is that we stand fast and continue to carry the torch of Lady Liberty. We have been a prosperous and a free nation because of our constitutional principles, our veterans, and the sacrifices of those who serve in our military on active duty. Do we have any veterans in the house today? Do we have any active duty? God bless you, and give them a hand. They sacrifice daily for us to remain free. It is now our time to sacrifice for them. Let us also never forget that America is a gift from Almighty God. We must, in the era of President Trump, remain diligent to our cause and pass down our principles to future generations intact. We can't compromise because to the progressives, compromise equals defeat. They don't want to give us a little. They want it all. So we have to be willing to stand up and defend it all. Am I right about that? So I ask you today, will you join me this day to ask our Creator God to continue to bless and protect us in this era of President Trump and during this era of unprecedented attempts to destroy conservatism and the American dream? They're not going to stop. We mustn't give up. Will you today unite and fight for the cause of freedom and liberty for each and every American? Will you today? Is there anyone in the room today who will stand up on their feet and say, I will stand up and defend my liberty, my Constitution, my Declaration of Independence, and stand behind our nation and make this nation the same nation that was passed down to us from our founders to our grandchildren and to our great-grandchildren? We must do that today. We are blessed. We are truly blessed. I'll change that. We are truly blessed to be Americans. We are blessed to live in a land where we can enjoy the blessings of God and the fruit of our labor. But we must never forget that we are under constant attack by those who dislike what our founders gave us. So therefore, it is our duty to protect our freedom and our liberty. Ponder the words of one of our founders, Ben Franklin, who said, "We have a republic if you can keep it." Can we keep it? Will we keep it? Will we continue to work to keep it? Will we unite to keep it? So I ask of you today, my friends, once again, can you keep it? And are you willing to work to keep it and pass it down to our posterity? God bless you. And God bless each and every one of you. And continue to work together. Continue to support one another. Support your local groups, because we are the Tea Party. Regardless of what these national groups might do to take away and put the emphasis upon themselves as leaders, it is you and I who are going to save this country with the help of Almighty God. And remember one thing today in closing: freedom and liberty. Use them or lose them. And I'll repeat that. Freedom and liberty. Use them or lose them. God bless you. Thank you. God bless America.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started here for the noon program here. We're going to have I'm going to make a couple minutes remarks for you regarding the RNC update, and then we're going to have lunch. There'll be a couple of videos, some more great speakers, and we're going to just kind of keep things moving forward. So thank you, everybody, for being here. You are definitely part of making America great to start with, but now keeping America great is the key thing that we're going to do here. Thanks to Norm and the board for a great effort here. It's a lot of work to put on one of these programs, bringing in all these different speakers and keeping things going. So thank you, Norm and the board, for that. How many people here? Let's have a quick raise of your hands if you're precinct delegates. Precinct delegates, raise your hands. Okay, precinct delegates, make sure you renew. Get some friends to renew. You're going to have a big say this year. You got Supreme Court candidates, Attorney Generals, Secretary of State. You got some candidates here, all the education boards, so make sure you're involved in doing that. So, how many people are excited about having Donald Trump as president? Is that awesome? I mean, when you think about it, you think, well, what is your favorite accomplishment? Is it Gorsuch? I mean, that's pretty good. How about the decrease in regulations? That's pretty good. How about getting out of the Paris Climate Accord? We don't even talk about that anymore. How about the border security that he's working on and trying to drag Congress along with him? How about, the economy? How about record low unemployment for the black population, the Hispanic population, the stock market going crazy? How's your 401k looking? How about those over 500 companies that have given out bonuses of over $1,000 in raises? I mean, all of this has happened. How about energy? I mean, the energy revolution in the United States has revolutionized our foreign policy, and that is a great thing as well. So Donald Trump has done just wonderful, wonderful things. But the key part of Donald Trump, and as great as all of those things are, right, they're awesome. But he did one thing even more important than all of those things. He did the one thing that no one else could do. Ted Cruz couldn't do it. Rand Paul couldn't do it. Nobody could do it. And that was what? He beat Hillary Clinton. Okay, so that was absolutely critical. Now, how many people look at Washington, D.C. as the swamp? Okay. In Washington, D.C., we have the swamp dwellers, and we have the swamp drainers. I'll call out a name, and you yell out dweller or drainer. Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, Paul Ryan, Mark Meadows. I didn't know that one as well. Mark Meadows, okay. Jim Jordan. Yeah, Rand Paul. How about the National Republican Congressional Committee? How about the National Republican Senatorial Committee? How about the Republican National Committee? See, that's why I'm making my remarks. The NRCC and the NRSC clearly are dwellers. Their job is to help and pick primary candidates and help those candidates get elected. And we saw that classically in Alabama, didn't we, where the NRSC spent $40 million to guarantee that a Democrat got elected, where if they just sat down, did nothing, Mo Brooks unequivocally would be the U.S. Senator in the state of Alabama. The RNC met with McConnell multiple times. The Alabama RNC members, men, women, state party chair, met with McConnell's PAC multiple times. Stay out of Alabama. Let Alabama decide who the next senator is going to be in the state of Alabama. The dwellers made sure that it wasn't a Republican. Now, the RNC, let's be clear, the RNC, like the NRSCC for the Republican House, or for the House and the Senate, for the NRSC, the RNC is the political arm of the White House. The whole purpose of the RNC is to support the White House. We support the election of the president, they run the primary, the convention, the platform, the rules, and raise money for the president and help the president campaign. We are the political arm. When you see him going off to a campaign rally in Pennsylvania or Phoenix or somewhere, it's the RNC that pays for that. We are all about electing President Trump. And so we are absolutely the drainers. Now, you're used to hearing about them being the dwellers, and in part that's because when you have a Democrat president, the RNC is in a very different spot. They become part of the dwellers because they're trying to beat the Democrat president, of course, but they get to be taken over by a lot of people who want to be the next RNC chair. And so the key thing about the RNC is that we're 100% behind Trump. We've had resolutions. People ask all the time, well, why doesn't the RNC tell McConnell to do X? Or why doesn't they tell Ryan to do Y? Because we have no say or control over McConnell or Ryan. Zero control. We don't vote in their district, right? We don't get involved in any primary elections whatsoever. We don't do anything to raise money for individual candidates. We have zero involvement in the individual candidate game. And so what the RNC does do, other than support the White House, is it's the national ground game organization. We raise the money, we get the data, 30% of the money the RNC raises is spent on data. So we pass resolutions calling on the House and the Senate to fulfill their campaign promises, repeal Obamacare, build a wall, strengthen the military, decrease regulations, and we're sitting by as frustrated as you guys. So data, RNC's data, larger digital footprint than Nike Athletics, over 30 messages a day out and different messages. We support the state parties. Right now, the RNC is paying for more than 15 full-time people on the ground here in the state of Michigan. By the time the election comes, that'll be up to 50 full-time people in the state of Michigan being paid for by the RNC. Now, when it comes to the RNC and being behind Trump, who picked Ronna to be the chair of the RNC? Trump. The co-chair is picked by Trump. Now, the co-chair made a joke at the last RNC meeting, said, man, if you're the campaign guy for Trump in Ohio and you win, you get to be the vice chair. But if you win it for Michigan, you get to be the chair. And that's exactly what happened. So it's Trump that picked Ronna to be the chair or forwarded her. It's Trump that picked the co-chair, Bob Paduchek, who was his campaign chair in Ohio, who engineered the defeat of the never-Trumper state party chair in Ohio and helped get a pro-Trumper in there. The co-chair, Bob Paduchek, he's the chair of the nominating committee for this presidential election. You can count on the RNC being 1,000% behind the president. And anything you heard before the election of people who might have been from the RNC not for the president, Trump, as the candidate, is because all those people expected Trump to lose, and they all wanted to be the chair of the RNC. So they were building their bona fide swamper credentials. They're all gone. So the RNC is doing great. We've raised $160 million this election cycle. And the key part about that is it's small donations. You hear all about how the Republicans are the big money people. We've more than doubled the DNC's total money raised. We've more than doubled the money the DNC has raised in small dollar donations, less than $200. We've broken every record in fundraising, including every record in grassroots money raising, including donations under $200. The average donation is $48. 98% of the donors to the RNC are small donors, less than $200. So it's just been great from that point of view. And so there's just no question about that. So the State of the Union address, did that make clear what the position of the Dems are? And they're sitting on their hands with things that are just absolutely normal, pro-American, any normal person, the people that Trump activated to get out and vote and support him, the normal people who normally stayed home or voted Democrat because that's what somebody told them to do. Those people are now awake, but so are the Dems. And our last meeting, Newt Gingrich spoke, and he said the one thing that we underestimate is how vicious the Democrats are when it comes to meeting their goals and achieving their ends. But you guys are key. You're a key group. You understand absolutely that our rights are natural. They don't come from the government. Some of our other speakers talked about that, right? That we're citizens. You know, we're not subjects. And we're governed, not ruled. And that's you guys. And you're important for that. And you, as you know, and if people have mentioned over and over and over, our Constitution was convened to secure those rights, not to take them. So if you want President Trump to continue to realize, you know, his own greatness, that requires a Republican House and a Republican Senate. In 2018 here in the state of Michigan is absolutely critical because I'll tell you what, for Michigan to go Trump again in 2020 against a Democrat governor in the state of Michigan and a Democrat, controlled government, that is going to be a difficult chance, especially when we look at Secretary of State. We got a couple of the candidates here. Their whole goal is to make sure that we can't get election integrity, and I know we've had some speakers on that as well. So just make sure you're there. You know, the RNC is going to be there full force when it comes to the general election and the turnout. And let me just make one thing that popped in my head. For over 30 years, the RNC has not been allowed to be involved in get-out-the-vote operations because of a Democrat lawsuit, because the Republicans, of course, those awful racists, were suppressing the vote. And so just this last December, for the first time in 35 years, despite all the judge shopping, the Democrats were finally not able to get a judge to renew for another 7 years the decree that kept the RNC out of the get-out-the-vote. And, of course, they're challenging it, but that's going to be a big difference as well, is that we can do that. So just make sure you're out there. You know, your kids and your grandkids are dependent on it. They want to have a chance to be able to have their own great America, and it's going to take us and all of you guys to help keep that going. So we're going to move on here to get organized for lunch. I'm going to ask Dr. Franzel to come up. He's been involved with the school here for over 20 years. The school's been here for over 40 years, had thousands of graduates. 100% of their students go on to college. Just fantastic. Dr. Franzel here is a veteran and served in the armed forces and has done a fantastic job here working to help educate our young and get them moving forward into being citizens. And so here we have Dr. Franzel. Please welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Steele. Appreciate that. We were involved in an organization called Capital Connection this last September, and it involved hundreds of churches across the state that banded together. We had a 3-day convention, and we marched on the Capitol in a nice way, and we presented every senator in the state of Michigan and every representative with a copy of the gospel ship. We also presented them with a Bible. Every one of them were received, and they gave us a standing ovation in the floor, and I think we made some inroads with some of the state legislators here in the state of Michigan to let them know that we're here, and when we agree with what they have to say, we'll support them, and when we don't, we'll let them know. And so I wanted to present a copy of this very same picture to Norm. I appreciate Norm Hughes and the board and all those that are involved in helping to make and keep Michigan great. Norm, we've been praying for you, buddy. His health has not been real good, and I'm glad to see he's up and about and ready to go. And so I'm going to give that to you for you to put into your office. And appreciate you, and it has the story of the gospel ship. I have one more thing I want to give to him. I'm also president of the Alabama Baptist Seminary, and I do that on a part-time basis, and I'll be retiring in a couple years from here and doing it on a full-time basis. But we have a Brotherhood of the Bridge Builders organization, and we present that to distinguished people that we meet over the years, and some that are contributors to the college. And I'll read this. It goes along with it, and then it has a nice lapel pin that you can wear proudly. It says, "An old man going along a highway came at the evening, cold and gray, to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fear for him. But he turned, went safe on the other side, and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you are wasting strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day. You never again will pass this way. You're crossing the chasm deep and wide. Why build this bridge at eventide?" The builder lifted up his old gray head. "Good friend, in the path I have come," he said, "there followeth after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am here building this bridge for him." Norm says he's a sailor, so shipper. Amen. We really appreciate you being here. We count it a privilege to help in any way we can, and our staff is dedicated to make your time here as pleasant as possible. But let's pray for the food and get on with it. I know preachers always get up there and they get long-winded just when you're hungry, right? So let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer today. I thank you for each and every one that's here. Lord, we pray you will bless them and the individual organizations, ministries that they represent. Lord, we thank you for the fact, as has been mentioned, that you have given to us this nation. It was established under your power. It is a Judeo-Christian culture. And Lord, today we honor you. We recognize and glorify your name. Lord, I pray that you'll bless the food now to each and every one that's here. Lord, we pray you bless the hands of those that prepared it. Lord, continue to have your hand upon this conference. And Lord, help us, Lord, as we seek to glorify you and maintain the standards that this country has represented over the years. Lord, help us to stand bold. And Lord, we're careful to give you the praise, the honor, and the glory. In Jesus' name we pray. And all of his children said, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Franzel. So let's go ahead and there's going to be a buffet style. If we could start with the speaker's table over here, and then if we could work from the front back. There's going to be, while you're eating, there will be some videos and some other things going on that you can pay attention to. And appreciate it. Enjoy your lunch. They always do a great job. Thank you.
The committee this year was a little bit bigger than usual that worked on this. We have certificates for all of them. I'm going to give you yours, Kimberly. John, Danielle, would you come up? I've got one for, now I have in this box, one for the entire committee, and I'm going to read their names here. Thank you, John. John is the president of MCU. And among others, Jay Taylor. Jay, would you come up? And Janice Daniels and Darius Renette and Darlene Littlejohn. I want all you to come up as well. And I've got awards for you in addition to certificates. Jay, as executive director, has put in a countless number of hours. I appreciate that. And Darius has been our secretary, really stepped up, doing a great job all year long. I appreciate that. Is Darlene, Janice, our spark plug, our, you know what an ANCUS is? An ANCUS is that little stick that the elephant tamer uses to keep the elephants in line. Well, we are the ANCUS to the Michigan GOP, and Janice is the ANCUS to us. And Darlene, I have one for her as well, and we'll give these certificates out. Now, I want to ask any of the new MCU members, if there are new ones here, come on forward. We're going to pin you today. We got these nice little pins, and come on and get yours. And I'll tell you that if you were a member, you got $10 off today. We're going to reverse that. If you're here, we're going to give you $10 off on your membership. So if you're an individual member, it's going to be $25 instead of $35. If you are a family member, it's going to be $40 instead of $50. And so we hope you'll sign up, and the ladies at the corner table can take care of that. Why don't you hand out the pins?
Yes. How many members do we have here? And do you all have your pins? If you do not have your pins, if we have not given them to you, would you please come up so we can give them to you? I want to just say a few words of why it's important to be a member of this group. You can see the incredible value of the speakers we've had here today. Norm works very hard at putting on a quality content convention every year. You can only do that and take advantage of it and get all there is to benefit from it by being a member. If you're a member, you get a pin, you get to have a newsletter that's electronic at least once a month. Any news flashes that are important to our existence in this world that we live in, Norm puts it out. You have Facebook page information. The networking here is phenomenal. Meeting the people here and all the vendors, there are just a lot of reasons to be a member. If you want to become a member today, you can see me after this. It's $25 and you'll get your pin.
All right. Thank you. Rob? Where'd Rob go? Oh, okay. Well, that's all for this part of the program, and I think we are going to expedite to the speaker while you're eating.
We've got to extend this a couple of more minutes. And I get to give a speech. I had 6 pages, but I had to cut it down.
Put the microphone by your mouth.
There's a saying that goes, every great journey begins with one step, and that is true. It's also true that every group movement begins with one person. The board members and the directors of the Michigan Conservative Union all joined this well-established, highly effective, and going group of concerned American Christians, conservatives, and other liberty-loving people as a result of our one-time chance meeting with a man named Norm Hughes. We so often enjoy the benefits of the hard labor of our leaders without thinking twice about the great contributions of time, money, energy, and knowledge that goes into the keeping an organization like Michigan Conservative Union relevant and on the radar of popular thought for over 40 years. So this time we decided to acknowledge the great lifetime contribution that Norm Hughes has made for the advancement of the conservative movement. We have a plaque for Norm that I would like to read, and we also have a gift card that I would like to present to Norm, but only if he promises me that he will spend these funds on a well-deserved vacation of his and his lovely wife Susan's choice. Norm, if you will please come forward to the stage, which is obviously here. So you can see the plaque. Okay. Presented the 7th day of April 2018 in recognition and appreciation of lifetime of work in support and defense of our Christian conservative constitutional principles to the Dean of the modern conservative movement from your devoted Board of Directors. Presented with honor, respect, and admiration to Norman Hughes, Chairman, Michigan Conservative Union.
Wow. I'm used to giving instead of getting, but this crew is just phenomenal, and it's a gift from God that we've met each other and traveled this journey together. So thank you very, very kindly.
AccessVision, your voice, your community.